We are live now. So we get some attendees, so go ahead.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the public, members of the General Plan Advisory Committee. I'd like to welcome you to the first meeting, project kickoff for the Hollister General Plan Update of 2040. It's an important first step of our journey on updating the city's general plan. Your attendance and questions are very important. We welcome you to be an active member, and we appreciate your time to this event.
Thank you, Brian. Shall I go ahead from here?
Yes, please. Okay,
great. And why don't we then put the slides on? I've introduced myself a couple times, but I'll do it again just to make sure everybody's heard it. I am David Early, and I am the principal in charge for the team from PlaceWorks. PlaceWorks is the consultant who's been selected by the city to run the general plan update. And I think, as all of you know, this is the first meeting of the General Plan Advisory Committee, who will be overseeing the process for us. With me this evening is Carrie Stone, who is our project manager. Carrie's done a great deal of the work to get us this far and will be helping me to oversee the project as we move forward. There are a number of other members of city staff here, as well as the GPAC committee members. So maybe city staff can introduce themselves. We already heard from Brian. Abraham, if you're there, maybe you want to introduce yourselves, and then Amber, Eva, and Areli can, as well as the other folks who are here from the city.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. My name is Abraham Prado. I am the planning manager with the City of Hollister Development Services Planning Division, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank
you. If one of you is speaking, it's very hard to hear you. I think Amber, Eva, and Areli, you're all muted right now. If one of you is speaking, you would unmute yourself.
Speak into the microphone.
We're trying not to loop the sound being in the same room. Can you guys hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Well, maybe, I don't know that I think most folks probably know Eva, Amber, and Areli, so maybe we'll just move on. Rose Redlick is also here from city staff. And Maria, I'm not sure we've met. If you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll have the three. Oh, and Frederick Venter from our team is here. Frederick is our traffic engineer. He's here this evening. Maria, if you want to introduce yourselves, and then the three committee members could introduce themselves as well.
Excuse me. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria. I am with the City of Hollister Development Services. I am the Cannabis Affairs Manager.
Great. Okay. Mr. Mayor, as the first of the three committee members, would you like to introduce yourself briefly? I think most people know you, but just to hear from you.
Sure thing. This is Ignacio Velasquez, Mayor for the City of Hollister. And thank you, David. I'm excited about this opportunity to finally get started on this project.
Great. Councilmember Resendez.
Hi, everyone. I am Councilmember Roland Resendez for District 2, City of Hollister. Again, very excited. Thank you guys for all the hard work. This is long overdue. I'm looking forward to getting started with this.
And Commissioner Huboy.
Oh, thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is David Huboy. I am a local architect, self-employed architect in the City of Hollister, and I'm also a current planning commissioner. I was on the 2004 GPAC committee as a member of the general public. And when the seat came up on the Planning Commission in 2005, I've been on the Planning Commission ever since. So,
wow, they didn't let you go, huh? Once you were drawn in, they didn't let you go.
Well, that's what drew me in, was the experience I had, a positive experience when we did the 2005 general plan.
Great, that's wonderful. Okay, so I think now everybody who's in the meeting has introduced themselves. Is there any, or has been introduced? Is there anyone I've missed? Okay.
Hi, this is Danny Hilstock, the city engineer. I'm also on the meeting.
Oh, great. Thank you, Danny. I'm sorry, you and I spoke earlier and I forgot to introduce you. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, well then let's go to the slideshow. The slides are up already. If we could have the next slide. I want to just give an overview of the agenda, and I want to note at this point that we anticipate that the agenda for all GPAC meetings will generally follow the same overall order. There will be a call to order. We've talked about, we've had the GPAC introductions already. I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of meeting procedures. Then, as you do in all your city meetings, there will be a time period for public comment on items not on the agenda. I believe there's no public here this evening, even though this is a publicly noticed meeting, so I think that will go quickly. And then if there were any, we would take old business. Of course, this being the first meeting, there is no old business, and we'll go directly to new business. And for new business, we have 5 items this evening. I'll be giving an overview of the general plan and the process. That is an informational item only, but we want to give you that and take any comments you have. And then we have 3 action items for you: the election of a chair and vice chair, a discussion of whether you would like to take action regarding vacant seats on the GPAC, and then a discussion of the study area intersections that will be studied as part of the general plan. When we wrap those things up, the last item this evening will be a summary of the meeting, and then letting you know next steps, and particularly the upcoming meetings for the GPAC and other events coming up. So that's our agenda this evening. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that before we dive in? All right. Oh, go ahead.
I just want to note that we do have members of the public joining us tonight.
Oh, we do. Okay. That's great. I'm sorry. I guess I did not realize this, but I guess I can't see them as on the screen. Oh, so I've got a different list here. Okay. We have 13 panelists and 13 attendees. Oh, nice. Okay. So I am not as adept with this as I should be. I apologize to those of you who are here. I can now see that there are 13 attendees who are not considered panelists, and I apologize that I missed that, and Carrie is very wise to point that out to me. So thank you all for being here this evening. We will be having public comment on items not on the agenda, and then every one of the 4 new business items will take public comment as well. All right. Any other comments or questions before we go on from the agenda? Okay, let's take the next slide then. I wanted to talk a little bit about our meeting procedures. These meetings are being recorded. I believe many of you who can see the screen can see in the upper left-hand corner a little red dot and the word recording. That does indicate that we are recording this meeting over Zoom as a video, and with the audio obviously also, and the meeting will be posted to the general plan website once the meeting has concluded. All meetings will begin with a roll call, which we've essentially done through the self-introductions, and a brief overview of the meeting. There will be public comment periods on both items not on the agenda, as well as agenda items. We will be asking speakers to stick to the standard 3-minute time limit for each time a person speaks, and of course each speaker would speak only once during each period, once for items not on the agenda and once for each agenda item. Comments can be presented online via email while we're in the Zoom phase of shelter in place. They can be sent, as it says on the slide here, to planmeetings@hollister.ca.gov, and that allows folks to request a registration link for the Zoom meeting. Once you have registered yourself, you will also be able to make comments either through email or at the meeting here itself via the Zoom, and you will be recognized, and then we'll turn on your video, your audio. And if you are there in person, we ask that you complete a blue speaker card and provide it to staff at the meeting. If you are going to speak and you're not in the space, we do request that you send an email and identify yourself, which is the equivalent of the blue speaker card. We should note that the GPAC, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, the GPAC is subject to the State of California's Brown Act, which has to do with open meetings. And among other things, that means that GPAC members are only able to discuss and comment on items that are on the agenda. If new items come up through a public comment period or some other time during the last item on the agenda for next steps, GPAC members can ask that those items be agendized for future discussion, but they can't be discussed at the meeting itself. That, I believe, gives an overview of all the GPAC meeting procedures. Are there any questions about any of that before we go on? Let me mention too, in terms of if you are in the public and want to make a comment, and someone should correct me if I say this incorrectly, but I believe that there are two ways you can do that. If you have it, you can use the chat function and send a chat message, or you can raise your hand using the hand raising feature. And Amber, Eva, or Aurelie, are there other ways that people who want to speak can make themselves known? And did I say those ways correctly?
We do not have the chat feature enabled.
Okay.
You have the ability to raise hands.
Okay. So hopefully anyone who does want to speak can understand how to see the raise hand function. Can one of you say for the non-panelist participants, where on their screen would they see the raise hand feature?
It should be on the bottom of your screen.
At the bottom, it should be at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that. If you're unable to see it and you are at a computer, I believe you could send an email to planmeetings@hollister.ca.gov and we'll try and work that out for you. All right, so I think then, unless there are questions or comments otherwise, we can go on. Next slide. All right. So we did have a brief introduction from each of the three GPAC members. Let me ask here if each of you would like to just restate the governing bodies that you're with and any additional hopes that you want to elaborate on for the general plan process. Mr. Mayor, would you like to begin?
I'm here representing the City of Hollister. Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Resendez?
Same. I'm here representing City of Hollister, Councilmember Roland Resendez. Thank you so much.
All right. And Commissioner Huboy?
I do have a statement on my hopes for the general plan, if I may.
Please.
I'd like to say is that I guess one of the reasons that I was selected to the previous GPAC committee was my passion for solar design and green building standards and energy conservation programs, which I was able to make some contributions in the 2005 general plan. And I also had some input in the areas of workforce housing, as well as a proponent of new urbanism and mixed use for the downtown area. I'm excited as to what positive change can come about by building consensus and to consider opportunities to embrace principles of smart growth that we may further enrich the city that I have grown to love. That is my statement.
Great. Thank you very much for that statement. All right. With that, we can move on to our next slide. And this is the time now for public comment regarding items that are not on the agenda. So hopefully you and the public have had a chance to review the agenda. I went over it a little earlier. If you have a comment on an item that's not on the agenda, now would be the time to give it. And so staff, Eva, Amber, or Aurelie, do you have a show of hands if there is if there are any speakers at this time?
We have one.
Okay, and I apologize. I'm a little rusty on exactly how this will work, but I assume that there's a staff member at City Hall who will recognize the name of the speaker and turn on their audio.
We do have a comment card, David. Robin Pollard.
Okay, so can someone let me see? Maybe I can do this. So Robin is ROBIN is not listed as an attendee. I do see that Mia Casey has her hand up, so I'm going to recognize her. And Robin, if you are here under a different name or a phone number, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you next.
David, she's actually here in person.
Oh, she's there in person. Okay, great. Well, then let's go ahead and recognize Robin. I guess she'll be speaking. I do want to say it's still hard to hear folks from the microphone lectern. If there's any way that she could get closer to the actual microphone that's picking up the sound, I think that would be a service for those of us who are attending remotely.
Can we try? How does this sound? Am I loud enough?
It's better than Abraham was, to be honest. But I think it'll be okay. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, my name is Robin Pollard, and I'm here tonight because of the last general plan. Vista Park Hill, which is in the heart of our city, was designated a R3, and it was actually city property. And I wanted to make sure that this round we don't have the required getting the troops here to acknowledge that this is public property and not R3. And also in this general plan, it's very important that we make a plan for Park Hill. It's burned 3 times this week. This morning, the county or the city was up there boarding up the windows again. It's a beautiful place that has lots of possibilities, but it keeps getting rolled over. So I'm here to make sure that Park Hill is in this master plan, and I'll be here at every meeting bringing it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Robin. I next would like, are there other speakers in the chambers?
That is the only speaker in the chamber, David.
Okay, thank you. Mia Casey has raised her hand, so I would like to recognize her next, and I hope that staff can help too. Mia, your microphone is now available, and I see you've unmuted yourself, so go ahead.
Yes, I have. Hi, this is Mia Casey, and I'm here today to just comment just some general on the process itself. So, you know, I'm excited to participate in our general plan process, but I'm also deeply troubled. I hear that we want to have lots of engagement from the public, but my experiences so far has made me doubt whether this is true. I've attended several city council meetings, and we've had members of the community speak out regarding the General Plan Advisory Committee, and also a petition was presented to the City Council that had approximately 90 Hollister residents, and we wanted some consideration. And in that petition, we were talking about things like having broader citizen participation on the GPAC. For instance, 1 citizen representative from each city, from each district.
That item is on the agenda.
Please don't interrupt me, please.
It'll violate the rules. That's why I'm pointing that out.
I'm talking in general terms about a petition. I'm not talking about that specifically. We also had asked for someone of a differing viewpoint. Rather than Councilmember Resendez being appointed, we wanted someone who was similar to Councilmember Richmond to replace him, so that we'd have diversity of opinion and good dialogue. And we also had asked for inclusion and discussion around an urban growth boundary for Hollister to be part of the general plan process. You know, it makes far more sense to integrate this into that process and for the community of Hollister to decide what should happen with regard to growth in our city, rather than an initiative being shoved down our throats by outsiders. There was no response or even an acknowledgement of any kind to the petition or by the public comments. Instead, the mayor had appointed who he wanted and had someone who holds a similar view on growth, and has decided he's not going to allow any more delays and would move ahead. So here we are without a full GPAC committee and no citizen representation at all. Now, I have grave concerns whether or not public engagement is truly going to be considered in this process. And I think it's ill-advised to move forward and start electing chairs and co-chairs without a full representative committee and at least some citizen representation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Casey. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time on an item that is not on the agenda? I see John Casey has raised his hand. As we move forward, I do want to point out, as I believe it was the mayor who said, that the question of the GPAC composition and whether the GPAC itself will make a recommendation about the composition is on the agenda for later. So I do want to echo the comment that those comments really should be saved until later. I do also agree that Ms. Casey just made other comments that were not specifically about that item, but those speakers who may be coming forward next, if you have commentary on the GPAC composition, I would encourage you to hold it. And you'll be welcome to give it later, but you're very welcome to speak right now on any other item that's not on the agenda. Mr. Casey, I see your hand has gone down again. Are you still wanting to speak? If you are, Yeah, your hand is up again. Great. And I believe you've been unmuted. So go ahead and speak. You'll have
I'll
3
hold, given those parameters, I'll hold my comment till the other part.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak on an item not on the agenda? All right, then I think we can go on and we're ready for the next slide. And this slide begins my presentation about the general plan process overall. And I'll be going through about 10 to 15 slides here just to give you a sense of the flow of things and give an overview of the entire process. This is not an action item for the GPAC, but we will, once we're done with this, follow the same standard protocol, which is first take any clarifying questions from GPAC members, then open it up for public comment, and then go back to any final comment from the GPAC. If there were the need for an action, the end of that discussion would be an actual vote. And that won't happen on this item, but it will happen on the other items this evening. So what is the general plan? Many of you know this already. The general plan in every jurisdiction in the state of California is a blueprint for growth and development, as it says here, and also for conservation for an entire city or even county. So every city and town in the state has a general plan. Every county has a general plan that affects the unincorporated areas. So for instance, San Benito County has a general plan for the unincorporated portions of San Benito County. Hollister's general plan governs development within Hollister. And again, it is the blueprint for growth and development and conservation within the city. It establishes a community vision and supporting goals, policies, and actions. It provides consistent direction for future development. It balances growth, conservation, and quality of life. And it also is a place where we document baseline environmental conditions so that as development occurs, we're able to both prepare environmental impact documents and also just understand and track changes to the environment that occur as development occurs. Next slide. The general plan under the law is required to contain a total of roughly, I say roughly 7 elements because the law changes on this and there are some elements that are a little bit optional. But the state law talks about elements, which I like to say it's a fancy word for chapter. The reason they're called elements and not chapters is that the law actually specifically says that these elements can be combined in any number of chapters, however one would like to do it. In the case of the Hollister General Plan, there are currently a total of 6 elements that cover 7 required items. These are land use and community design, circulation, housing, natural resources and conservation, open space and agriculture, and health and safety. And that health and safety element includes both what's required under the law as the safety element as well as the noise element. Custom to Hollister, beyond the state requirements for those 7 elements, the current general plan already has a community services and facilities element. Our scope of work includes also adding an arts element, an economic development, and it's not listed here, but potentially under a relatively new state law, SB 1000, possibly also an environmental justice element. Those will all be considered as we move forward through the process. And it's important to note here that the general plan was last updated in 2005. Commissioner Huboy, as he mentioned, was on the general plan advisory committee at that time. And I want to say I think it's actually an excellent general plan that you have. It is 15 years old now. It does need to be updated to accommodate both state law and other changes that have occurred on the ground in Hollister, but it's going to provide a very good foundation for the work that we're going to be doing moving forward. Next slide. So the general plan update has a series of goals that we've worked with staff to establish, and I wanted to make sure the GPAC is aware of those and the community. We are going to be trying to engage a broad spectrum of the community. All of our meetings of the GPAC will be open to the public, and I'm glad, despite my faux pas earlier, I'm glad to see that despite this being a virtual meeting, that we have some pretty robust engagement here this evening. We certainly hope that can become even greater as we move forward into in-person meetings at some point. We will also be running virtual and later in-person community events to engage the community further. We will also, and I'll talk about this later, we will have a robust community website, and it will have online engagement activities to engage the community as well. So engaging a broad spectrum of the community is the first goal. Beyond that, it's establishing the community's vision for Hollister in 2040. It's interesting that the general plan, it's a great document. One of the things that's actually missing is a succinct statement of what the community's vision for itself is. And so we'll be working with you based on the current general plan and also based on input in that community engagement to develop a short and concise vision statement for what Hollister wants to be in 2040. Other goals are to continue to maintain the town's small town agricultural character, which I think most residents really love and cherish, to manage growth consistent with the community's overall goals, to ensure high quality development of all types, to support economic development, and to respond to state mandates and general plan guidelines that have been put in place since 2005 and are therefore not reflected in the current general plan. So those are the overall goals for the project. Let's go on to the next slide. The project does have a number of components centered around the general plan, and you can see here on this list that the first and foremost of these obviously is the general plan update itself. We'll be updating all of those existing elements. We'll be adding the 2 or 3 new elements I mentioned, and we'll be creating for you with GPAC guidance and with very significant community input, we'll be creating a new general plan. But we'll also be doing 5 other things that are listed on this slide. We're working to implement SB 743, that's Senate Bill 743, which is a state law that's actually almost 10 years old now, but is just being implemented this year, which requires cities and counties to move away from analysis of traffic impacts using what are called delay-based mechanisms, such as level of service, which some of you may have heard of, that look at congestion, and instead to analyze vehicle miles traveled. We'll be able to talk more about that as a future meeting, but implementing SB 743 and doing this transition from level of service or congestion-based analysis to vehicle miles traveled is one of the very important components of this project. We're also going to be developing a climate action plan as well as a hazard mitigation plan, both of which are planning documents that cover obviously climate change and hazards, and both of which go into a greater level of detail than we can do in the general plan, but which are important supporting documents for the general plan. We'll be preparing those as well. We will also be preparing a comprehensive environmental impact report that will both establish the environmental baseline for the community and will also daylight whether there are any environmental impacts that either need to be or cannot be mitigated as a result of implementation of the general plan. And then finally, we'll also be updating the city's municipal service review, which is the document that the city uses to allow for new annexations of land that are currently outside the city and want to be brought into the city for development. That's a document that's required under state law and by what's at the county level called the Local Agency Formation Commission, and updating that municipal service review document is another important part of our scope of work. Next slide. We will, as we look at all of those issues, we will be considering what we call a planning area, which you see noted on this slide. This slide is, I notice, is a little hard to read, but hopefully you will be able to make sense of it. And perhaps, Amber, I believe you've got control of the computer. You could note first the city limit, which is the smallest line on the area in a dark line. And then a little larger than that is the city's sphere of influence, which is the area that the city and LAFCO expect might be annexed in the future. And then the urban service area, which is the red line, which is a larger area, even larger than the sphere of influence, which is an area where the city can provide urban services. We really must plan for all of those areas because the city is has already annexed them in the case of the city limit, is thinking of providing services there, or is thinking of annexing those areas. But there's an even larger area that affects the city. It may never be annexed, it may never be developed. It will probably, parts of it, much of it will likely stay under county jurisdiction, but its adjacency to the city makes it very important as well. So that purple line that you see as the outermost purple dashed line, that is the area that we plan to study as the planning area for this general plan. That's the area that we'll be considering from a planning perspective. We'll be seeking to understand existing conditions in that entire area, and we'll be seeking to understand how development that occurs in that area, even if it's under county auspices, how that development might affect things inside of the city of Hollister. So it's a relatively large area. As I've said already, it's larger than the urban service area or the sphere of influence, but it does completely include both the sphere of influence as well as the urban service area. Next slide. I wanted just to mention some other key issues that we'll be looking at. I've already alluded to most of these, but I think they're important to understand. We will be considering growth management and how growth should be managed within the context of the city as a whole, and both inside the city and also in coordination with the county, because I think we all know that a large amount of development occurs on unincorporated county lands immediately adjacent to the city limits. So we'll be looking at all those issues. We will be looking at circulation and transportation for cars, but also for pedestrians, for bicycles, and for transit. We will be looking at economic development and particularly the creation of high quality jobs. And we will be looking at community identity and high quality design. Of course, there are many other subjects: safety, health, noise, greenhouse gases, and so forth. Those are all things that will be covered, but these 4 issues are 4 of what we've at least so far identified as 4 of the most important issues for this planning process. Next slide. I already mentioned that we have very robust opportunities planned for public involvement. You see this list here that includes at least 6 workshops and community events over the course of this process, online activities on the project website, a total of 10 GPAC meetings, of which this is the first, updates to the Planning Commission and the City Council at key junctures, and then of course action on the general plan and its EIR by both the Planning Commission and the City Council at the conclusion of this process. Due to COVID-19, of course, future outreaches for the foreseeable future are going to rely on virtual technology as we're using at this meeting. The online activities, of course, will continue to be conducted as online activities, and what were going to be in-person workshops and events will be done online as well. So for example, and I'll talk about this again in a few minutes, but we did originally plan to have a visioning workshop that would have been held in person. Instead, we're going to conduct 4 separate online visioning workshops that will be very similar workshops with the same content, but held at 4 different times of day and different days of the week to allow as many people as possible to participate online.
I have a question.
Sure. Well, generally speaking, I want to take questions at the end, but go ahead and ask that, and we'll take that now.
Will those 4 workshops conclude as to 1 workshop since they're being done online?
The way that will work is that it's not, they will not be sequential, or there won't be one that has more say than any of the others. But instead, staff and consultants will be summarizing the findings from all 4 of those workshops, and we'll be bringing them back to you at your next GPAC meeting, which in that sense, that GPAC meeting will be the culmination of all of that work, where you as the GPAC will take action on a vision document. And that, of course, will be a public meeting. So that's really the place where a final yet preliminary decision about the general plan vision will be created, is here at the GPAC, at GPAC meeting number 2.
Thank you.
Next slide. We do want to underscore the fact that we're very committed to outreach to diverse groups. Some of you heard me say at the beginning of this meeting that we are hoping and we are planning to conduct simultaneous interpretation of all of these meetings online in Spanish. That's turned out to be a little more complicated to do with the Zoom technology than we hoped, and so we're not able to offer it this evening, but we do believe that it will be ready for future meetings. In addition, as the 3rd bullet on this slide mentions, that we'll be translating our outreach materials into Spanish. The website is being translated into Spanish. We're also going to be working with community leaders to make sure that they help us to reach out to all the diverse portions of the Hollister community. We're going to be utilizing existing contacts from all city departments, from elected officials, and from the GPAC itself. And we're going to be structuring meetings and workshops to accommodate diverse participants. And that's one example of that, as I already mentioned, is holding these 4 different visioning workshops online at 4 different times of day and 4 different days of the week week in order to be able to involve as broad a number of people as possible. Next slide. So I do want to mention the project website. It is up and running, and as you can see here, it's available at www.hollister2040.org. If you go there today, you will find what's called a splash page or landing page that looks like the one you see on this screen. As you can see, it has a couple of most prominent boxes. The one on the far right talking about this evening's meeting, a yellow box that you can click on to find out other ways to get involved, the left-hand blue box giving an overview of the general plan itself. The yellow bar at the top is a link directly to the online activities, which we're getting online already. And then, as you can see, there are sub menus to get background about the general plan and the general plan process, for public engagement, for a calendar of events, for existing and past documents that one might want to look at, and a way to contact us, as well as to sign up for the general plan mailing list. So all of that is already up and running on the website at hollister2040.org. Next slide. The current website does already include robust background information, public engagement, a list of public engagement opportunities, an events calendar, and links to important documents. It's already available in both English and Spanish, and there are 4 online activities already available, and I would encourage all the folks from the public who are here this evening to go ahead and log on, not during this meeting, but either this evening later or sometime soon, and you can do all 4 of these items. You can you can submit a vision comment form to talk about your vision for Hollister. You can rank key issues that need to be addressed in the general plan, and you can upload both photos and words that you think are important to describe Hollister, either photographically or through a single word. And we're going to be making a word cloud showing which words get the most prominence. And we're also going to be letting people see those photos and the comments on them to understand what others think are really important visual items about the city of Hollister. So these are all up and running already. There will be additional online activities in the future. But again, I'd encourage those of you who are here this evening to go online, and do tell your friends and family as well. We really hope for very robust participation. Again, this is all available in English and Spanish, so it's very accessible for speakers of both primary languages in Hollister, and we're very excited to have all of you fill out engage in these 4 online activities right away as soon as possible. Next slide. This slide just gives an overview of the schedule for our work. We are going to be working on baseline conditions, and I think we learned today, actually just today, unfortunately, that our baseline conditions work, because of some delays caused by COVID-19, is probably going to extend into October, but we are working on that already right now. That will be now through the summer and early fall. We will be working with the GPAC and the public on the vision as part of that baseline conditions work, and that will happen from now through September. We'll be wrapping up the baseline conditions work in October, and once we get there, then starting, it says here August, but really starting from October to December or January, we'll be doing policy assessments and design alternatives of a series of important alternative issues that need to be covered under the general plan. Starting about the first of the year, we'll be preparing the general plan itself, as well as some of those other work products, and those will all become available over time, culminating in the fall of 2021, so just over a year from now. The environmental impact report will be available about the same time, and then even though I've been doing this for 25 years, it always amazes me to say that the public review and adoption, once we're done, will still take about another 6 months. Once we have the documents published, it takes quite a long time for them to get through public review, the Planning Commission, and the City Council. So that will happen from fall of 2021 into the first few months of 2022. So that gives you an overview of the schedule overall. You'll be able to get updates about this schedule and see the details on the website at hollister2040.org. Wanted to talk for a few minutes about the General Plan Advisory Committee itself and its role. I think you all know that the committee officially has 5 members. Only 3 have been appointed so far, but it's important to remember what the role is. There are 2 main functions, and both of which are of equal importance. The first is to review and make recommendations to the Planning Commission and the City Council as a whole on the work products that will form the content of the general plan update. I want to underscore that this is intended to be a review and recommendation function. It's not necessarily line item editing. The general plan, as I think all of you know, is a document of probably several hundred pages. The EIR will be another several hundred pages. It's probably not possible for any group to make line item edits to that in public meetings, but we are looking for overall review and overall direction at the 10 meetings that are coming up. And at the same time, we also are hoping that GPAC members will serve as project ambassadors to spread the word about the general plan update, encourage broad participation, and build community support for this process. So that process of going out to the community and listening to the community, as well as reviewing the documents that we do, are both equally important in this process. Next slide. The GPAC meeting, we are planning 10 meetings total. They obviously won't be every month over these 2 years, but they will be probably at most about once a month. And in some cases, there will be a 2 or perhaps even 3-month gap in between. We're planning generally on 2 hours per meeting. And I believe that at least now during shelter in place or minimal city council activities, minimal city activities in person, we'll be doing them online and probably at about 6 p.m. We believe that this is a pretty good time for people to be at their computers and not need to go too late into the evening. We're always going to try to make the meeting materials available online the Friday before each meeting. Next slide. And I did want to just go further and talk a little bit about the interface between the GPAC and the public. We are looking to do a very coordinated approach to gathering of public comment. And so what that means for GPAC members is to be able to listen to input. If you're asked factual questions about what's happening on the general plan, to go ahead and answer those. As we'll talk under the Brown Act discussion that we'll have in a few minutes, and I think all of you as GPAC members know this, you are actually prohibited from doing anything resembling decision-making outside of a GPAC meeting. You can't even discuss among yourselves those items outside of a GPAC meeting. So decision-making is limited to the GPAC meeting itself, but you are, of course, really encouraged to listen to public input and answer factual questions as they come up. We are going to include on our agendas moving forward time to report any significant interactions that you may have from one meeting to the next. We're expecting that you'll have lots of interactions about the general plan. We're not going to ask you to report on all of those, and we're going to leave it up to you to determine which ones you think are significant. But if you do have, for instance, an interaction with a significant citizen-based organization or a significant developer in town or someone else who really has an important message for you, we would encourage you to disclose that during the GPAC meetings at that point on the agenda. And we are also asking you to defer formal opinion gathering, things like surveys, to the staff and consultant team. Obviously, with Facebook and other technologies available, it's super easy these days to just create a survey. If you would like us to do surveys like that, we can do them. We can talk about doing them at the staff and consultant team level, but we would like that kind of opinion gathering to occur from staff and consultants rather than from one individual GPAC member or another individual GPAC member. So that gives you some information about what we foresee as your role as GPAC members for the public interface on this project. I do want to talk a little bit about the Brown Act requirements that I think many of you are aware of, but I want to make sure the public is aware of these as well. The Brown Act was put in place by the state of California many years ago. It was last updated in 2003, but it's been on the books much longer than that, and it's intended to ensure equitable public participation in government decision-making. And there are a number of issues here that come up for this committee, which is subject to the Brown Act. So the first is that every meeting needs to be publicly noticed and its agenda must be posted. The committee is precluded, as I mentioned at the outset, from talking about items that are not on the agenda, other than to ask that they be agendized for future discussion. So that is state law on this item and does apply to the GPAC as well as other city bodies. All meetings of the GPAC by definition are open to the public. That's why we're doing this robust work on Zoom. And of course, when we can, we'll be going back to public and in-person meetings. There are, by law, there need to be opportunities for public comments at every meeting, both an opportunity to discuss items that are not on the agenda, as well as some public discussion on every item that's going to be acted on by the committee itself. And then perhaps most importantly, GPAC members need to understand that any kind of what's called serial meetings is not allowed. It's not allowed for the GPAC members to get together in person. That is a majority of the GPAC, and right now, because there are only 3 members, even 2 would be a majority. If we get to 5 members, then 2 could meet, because that's not a majority, but 3 would constitute a majority. And a majority cannot get together and meet in person to discuss items. Any subcommittee that might be formed, which we're not necessarily recommending, but if there were a subcommittee formed, those would need to take place at public meetings. And even what we call a serial meeting is not allowed. And a serial meeting is both if one person were to talk to another by phone or in person, and then that second person went to a third person and talked to them. And then if there are additional members, that third person talks to a fourth. Once you get to a majority who have talked to each other serially in order, even if they weren't all together, under the law, that constitutes a meeting and is prohibited by the law. Similarly, group emails are prohibited. So you could, although we would not recommend it, you could send an email just disclosing something or giving information, but email cannot be used by GPAC members to begin a discussion or to move towards decision-making of any sort on an item. Again, that's prohibited by the Brown Act because it needs to take place in public at a public meeting. So if there are questions about that, once I finish up, I can answer those. I believe the city attorney is here as well, but that gives you my layperson's overview of the Brown Act requirements as they apply to the General Plan Advisory Committee. So in that concludes my slideshow on the general plan. This will be, I believe, our longest item this evening also. Certainly it's my longest presentation by far. I want to open it up now, and we're going to do this on all the items. There will be 3 parts of the discussion now. The first is that I want to open it up for any GPAC members, the 3 of you, for clarifying questions only. Then we will go to public comment if there are public members who would like to speak on this item. And then we'll come back for a GPAC discussion if there's any additional discussion on your part. There's no action on this item, but on the remaining items this evening, at the end of that discussion, you'll be able to move an action if you want to do that. So can I ask if there are questions from any of the 3 GPAC members?
Yes,
I do have a question.
I do have a question.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And you brought up a very good point about disclosing any connections with developers or other interests. I just want to make sure, are people supposed to be disclosing that if, for instance, somebody is working with a developer or a special interest group to help shape this? Is that a requirement to make sure that people are disclosing that ahead of time so we don't have an issue later of these things coming forward and basically arguments about it? I mean, it's obviously people can have the conversations, but are we going to be making that requirement to make sure if there's any connection or involvement with the developers, whether it's in the city or out of it, that would help shape this? Can we make that a requirement to make sure that is disclosed?
Yes, I would absolutely think that's a good idea. The way I couched it earlier, which is a little different, is that if one has a significant discussion with a developer, a citizen-based organization, or any other group, that should be disclosed as an individual item, an individual discussion. But it would be my hope that none of the General Plan Advisory Committee members are specifically aligned with a certain developer, CBO, or other interest group. But if any of you 3 are, or if there are 2 additional members in the future and either of them is, certainly we would want them to disclose in general. that they're aligned with those groups. Again, my understanding is that all 3 and ultimately 5 GPAC members are being appointed to represent the city, the interest of the entire city. So I would hope that there's no GPAC member who is specifically aligned with a specific developer or point of view. But if there is, I do think that should be disclosed.
Correct, but also those that are making comments throughout this process from the public. Does that have to be disclosed?
I think that would honestly be up to the individual speaker. Under state law, all speakers have the right to come forward and to give testimony simply by giving their name. We ask that people identify the organization they're from and also where they live, if possible by their street address or at least the town that they live in, which might be Hollister and might be elsewhere. But my understanding of the law is that we cannot require that disclosure, even though I think it is good form and common courtesy to do so.
Thank you.
Other questions?
This might be a legal question. Is the city attorney there? And
I believe he is.
Okay, so I think I have my answer, but we only have 3 GPAC members, and you said two constitutes a majority, right? What if we're meeting at the city council chambers, let's say, or the planning commission, let's say? Is that going to be a violation of the Brown Act? And I would imagine that it's not, because it's being formed as a public meeting, but I just wanted to get clarification. I have to recuse myself if we have any GPAC discussions at city council meetings and such.
I did see the city attorney online before. I don't see his name now. Does someone know if he is or was here?
He does not seem to be on, no.
So, Councilmember Resendez, I apologize. I maybe imagined this, but I thought I did see his name. He's apparently not here now. So I'll take my best shot at answering that, and staff could maybe check with him to confirm. But it is my understanding that as long as you're at a public meeting that is duly noticed to discuss the general plan itself, that the 2 of you being there does not constitute any violation of the Brown Act, even if you're only a committee of 3 at that time. It will be an agendized item. It will be appropriate for you to talk about it. Of course, it wouldn't be appropriate for the council to discuss the general plan if it's not an agendized item, regardless. So that's not really an issue either.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the 3 of you as GPAC members? Okay, since there are none, we will come back for further GPAC discussion after we hear from the public. Let me ask first if there are any people in the council chambers who've submitted cards to speak.
Robin Pollard.
Hi, I'm back. You'll have to be patient with me. I don't really understand the process, but you said the word environmental justice. And can you tell me what that is in this plan?
I'm sorry, I know you'd like us to define a term, and I did not hear what term you would like defined.
Environmental justice?
Environmental justice, yes. Environmental justice refers to the overall concept that there are, unfortunately, communities in our societies that have borne a disproportionate brunt of environmental degradation. Those tend to be lower income communities and communities of color. They're not always that, but they often are. And they are communities that are often subjected to large amounts of traffic, pollution, less access to food, more congestion in their communities, lower levels of education, and all sorts of issues like that. The state passed a law, and I'm probably going to mess up the date, but I believe it was 2018, which required every city, when it goes to update its general plan, to assess whether communities that meet certain criteria under state law in terms of socioeconomics and race exist within the community. And if they do, then it's a requirement to prepare what's called an environmental justice element to address those items that do have to do with equitable treatment in terms of planning zoning and environmental issues. So we will be doing that for this effort, and I believe we will probably find what are called EJ communities, environmental justice communities, that require treatment under the law. Even if we don't find any, the city can still elect to develop policies to address environmental justice issues within the context of the city as a whole.
The reason that I'm inquiring is because Park Hill was once federal land that was full of asbestos and toxins. And then the state, the feds gave it to the state. And then once the state finished, then the state gave it to the city with no money to clean it up. So where's the justice in that? My second question is the hazardous mitigation plan. There's also fuel tanks on Park Hill, and those fuel tanks, when I questioned the city about them 20 years ago, their response was that municipalities were not required to remove them. So I'm hoping that these two issues can be applied to Park Hill. Thank you.
Thank you. And I do want to note for everyone, we are taking notes this evening. Carrie in particular is taking extensive notes, and we have the recording as well. And we will be following up to consider all these items after the meeting. Is there anyone else in the council chambers who submitted a card to speak?
That's it.
All right. All right, then I'll recognize people from the online audience. Right now, Roxanne Stevens and John Casey have both raised their hands, or I'll call on Roxanne first. I do want to point out again for members of the public that there are additional agendized items, one of which does include the GPAC composition. So if that's an item you want to speak on, you can do that later. But right now, any comments on my presentation or any of the points I brought up are very welcome. Roxanne.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first I just wanted to just comment that I'm glad to hear that we're going to be doing some visioning work, because I do agree that that was a big piece that was missing in our current general plan. Actually, let me just step back a little bit because I didn't fully introduce myself. So I am Roxanne Stevens. I'm a resident of Hollister, and I'm also on the Planning Commission with Mr. Huboy. I'm excited to hear that we're going to be doing visioning work as well as talking about city identity, because I think that's really missing. The one thing that I hope to see improved in this current general plan and our next one is that our goals be more clear and more specific, and that they're measurable, because I think that was one thing that I found lacking in our former general plan, because it's hard to really know that you're making progress if you aren't able to really measure your goals. So I hope that the goals for this future one will be a little bit more clear and more specific and measurable. Also, I also hope that we have a version of the plan that is more succinct, because I think that it can be a really daunting document, especially for the general public to review. And it would be good if we had one that had all the information needed so that people could go back and refer to the bigger document, but also have another document that is more succinct so that people can look at the main points without getting bogged down in all the detail, and something that would be really easy for the public to follow. And then my last comment is around process, and I'm glad to hear that there will be a way for the Spanish-speaking community to be involved. I'm really sorry that that didn't happen for tonight's meeting, but I'm glad to hear that that will be happening in future meetings. I think that oftentimes that community, for a lot of reasons, are left out and their voices are not heard. So I'm hoping that every effort is made to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for that part of our community to be involved, and also just the general public. I hope that there's every effort to make sure that the general public can be involved, because ultimately the general plan needs to be a document that's reflected of the community or reflective of the community, not of the GPAC advisory committee or of our city council or the planning commission for that matter, but it really needs to reflect our community. So I really hope that every effort is made. And one of the things that I think that we could do to increase awareness around the workshops is to rely on TV PSAs. I know we've done noticing by newspaper, and there's stuff on social media that I've seen. But I think that people more likely will see it if it's on TV. There's older generations that maybe don't rely on social media.
So you know we have a 3-minute.
Yeah, we are right at that. We just went over 3 minutes. So.
Okay, so that's all I wanted to say. So thank you so much. And I will pay closer attention to my time next time I do comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And I do have my timer on, and I didn't necessarily want to stop our first person who'd gone over, but I will start enforcing a 3-minute limit now. The next person is John Casey. I want to recognize. Can we put his microphone on? Mr. Casey, you can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Yes, I will speak later on the other beats, but my name is John Casey and I'm a resident of Hollister. I'm just curious about how living this document is with the Strata Verde project that looks like it's going to be a ballot initiative and will have a large impact on Hollister. How living is this document that we'll adopt and make changes to, be able to make changes to as we move forward? Because again, our current plan is, started in 2005. It really hasn't run out, but we're looking at it because of changes that are impacting us both from a legal perspective and from environment. But what we look at today doesn't look the same as when this plan was started, when the first old plan was started. So I'm just curious how that works going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I will go ahead and answer that quickly since it was a very direct question. The general plan is very much a living document. It is the city actually is required by law to follow it and cannot approve development projects that are inconsistent with it. If a development project comes forward that is inconsistent with the general plan, the only way to approve it is to first amend the general plan to allow that project. I do want to point out again that I think if you're a resident of Hollister, it may be confusing. There is a large amount of development that occurs at the periphery of Hollister that actually happens under the jurisdiction of the county, not the city. And so in some cases, the city's general plan may not foresee a particular project, but it's consistent with the county general plan and it can therefore move forward. But no project that's inside the city limit of the city of Hollister can move forward unless it is consistent with the general plan, either through the existing document or through an amendment. I hope that answers the question, and I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Christina Chavez Wyatt.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, David and team and members of the committee and staff for convening this evening. My name is Christina Chavez Wyatt. I am a resident of Hollister on Sunny Slope Road. I do have a request on behalf of the work I do. As I serve as a consultant executive director of the San Bernardino County Business Council. I was just hoping to bring as a point of information in future meetings the recent letter that the city had received from the Housing Community Development Department of the State of California in regard to the city's growth management ordinance. I just think it's a really important point of information for the committee and for the public to consider. I also want to, thank you. I'd also, I'm working with Matt Ferris with BAE, or consultant, to convene a discussion with the Business Council Executive Committee. I also do work with California Manufacturing Technology Consulting. It's a manufacturing extension partner provider with the Department of Commerce. We also work with the State of California Small Business Technical Assistance and Expansion Program with the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development. And I'd be more than happy to work with your staff to convene a focus group for manufacturing businesses in support of the development of your economic development element. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other hands raised right now. I assume there's still no other speakers in the council chambers. Okay, we do have one new one coming up.
A speaker in the council chambers.
There is also a speaker in the council chambers. Okay, why don't we go to that person, and then we'll come back to Carminder Brown, whose hand is raised, and any others from the virtual audience. But let's go to the speaker from the public for in the real time first.
Thank you. My name is Kevin Henderson, resident of Hollister. I'm also a member of the Planning Commission.
Very difficult to hear you. I'm sorry.
Microphone if you can.
Yeah, take my mask off. My name is Kevin Henderson, resident of Hollister. I am also a member of the Planning Commission. I had a question. So, eventually there will be 2 members of the Planning Commission on the GPAC. Actually, okay, if this question is off, but what I'm trying to ask is about the Brown Act. Can the 3rd member of the Planning Commission attend the meetings, and what level are they allowed to participate?
Okay, I will repeat what I think was the question for everyone. My understanding of the question is that, and this would apply to council members now and later to the Planning Commission, that if there are 2 council members or planning commissioners on the GPAC, is it permissible for a 3rd or 4th member from those bodies to attend the meeting and participate as a member of the public? And again, the city attorney is not here, and I'm a little worried to give legal advice, but it is my understanding that yes, as long as you identify yourself and as long as you do not engage in the decision making, but you only ask questions or even give commentary or input and testimony, it is permissible for you to attend and to participate, obviously just not as a decision maker on the issue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we have 3 hands raised at this point on the virtual side. The next speaker would be Carminder Brown. And you can unmute yourself and begin speaking.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. My name is Carminder Brown. I'm a resident of Hollister on Kane Drive, but I'm here tonight representing the San Benito Agricultural Land Trust. My role with the Land Trust is contract staff. We at the Land Trust of San Benito see agricultural lands as the backbone of San Benito's economy and one of the primary sources of jobs and revenue in our county. We recognize that many Hollister residents along a broad range of income levels are employed directly in local agriculture, while many others are also employed in other related businesses and industries. We also see agriculture as an integral part of our local heritage, our quality of life, and the open landscapes we cherish. The Land Trust is not an advocacy organization. We don't take positions on growth, but we wanted to take the opportunity to introduce ourselves to the GPAC this evening, as well as to members of the public, to let everyone know that we are the only local land trust based in San Benito County, and we have the ability to help protect agricultural land by working in partnership with landowners, so farmers and ranchers, as well as with cities and counties, with realtors, developers, and the community. And we work to protect the most valuable agricultural land through a tool called conservation easements. Don't have time to go into that tonight, but I just wanted to encourage those of you who are not familiar with how conservation easements work and what they are. You can find more information about that on our website, which is sanbenitolandtrust.com. And we really look forward to participating in this process going forward. In particular, we are looking forward to providing input on the open space and agriculture element of the general plan, but I believe we may also be able to provide input on the natural resource and conservation aspect, as well as land use and community design. The last thing I wanted to say is that I was really pleased to see that one of the goals of the general plan update that was on one of your slides earlier was to maintain the small town agricultural character of Hollister. I believe that also aligns very much with the mission of the Land Trust. However, we would see the best way to accomplish that goal as to keep our agricultural lands and economy thriving. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next hand we have raised, and currently the last hand, is Bill Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hey, I just really wanted to just go on record on a couple of small things. One, glad to see some you know, some of the other speakers here tonight and the community getting involved. I just want to go on record. I still think that it's critical that we get more community involvement with this process, as well as more community representation on the GPAC board in order for this process to really yield the best result for the best good of the community of Hollister long term. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other hands raised at this time. Are there any other speakers in the council chamber?
No other speakers.
All right, and I don't see any other hands, so I believe we are ready to go back to the GPAC for a discussion on this item. Again, this is not an action item, so whatever comments you have, we're happy to hear from the 3 GPAC members, and then we'll move on to our other agenda items. Do any of the 3 of you have comments at this time?
David, I do have some comments.
Please.
I did make a fairly comprehensive list what I think are the key issues and the biggest challenge. And I appreciate Roxanne Stevens and Bill Lee. I do agree that when you started with what the general plan is, it's a consensus of community vision. And I think the biggest challenge is to obtain that consensus. I know back in 2005, we did not have an interactive website. So I think that could be a very constructive tool in that regard, but again, it's getting building the consensus of the community, I think, is the biggest challenge in this process. I know back in 2005, before we went into the visioning of the general plan, we started out with a critique of the current general plan. I think it may be helpful to begin, or at least at the first step of this process, is to critique the existing general plan and improve upon it. Now, what I think, and I'll try to be brief on this, what the key issues I think is, and I made a list of these items. I'll go very briefly through them, but I'll read some of what I wrote as what I think are the key issues. And I start off with consideration for adaptive growth to be flexible and responsive to changing needs should growth be incremental. Future connection of passenger rail to high density housing, that's another item. Consensus of the future of the airport. Coordination, and I'm very happy that you added another element to this general plan, is the arts component. And I want to disclose that I am a member of the Public Art Review Committee. And we are currently trying to get the City Council to, with a cultural arts master plan. And that could be, which could be strengthened through the partnerships of the City of Hollister, Gavin College, San Benito High School, Youth Alliance, Hollister School District, and others to promote art and culture within the urban context, to identify spaces and neighborhoods not served by public art and generate greater community engagement and social cohesion. To entertain ways Hollister can become more active and vibrant in the evening hours with destination development. Consider avenues of revitalization through creative use options for vacant buildings and sites. I know the planning staff is working on a complete streets master plan when we talk about the circulation element. Smart growth, diversity of housing types, tiny homes. On the subject of workforce housing, how can we respond to housing needs for lower income citizens and embrace a diversity of housing types in general, which is so paramount in our housing element, that our housing stock really does not respond to lower income citizens in our community. Instead of building houses in general, let's build sustainable neighborhoods to provide the options for senior citizens as well as young couples starting out to raise families. Strategies for the North Gateway beautification. Concept of urban villages. Design changes in response to the pandemic. Can parking lots be used for outdoor dining when the downtown is closed off? And that's I think I'll end right here, but I think the time is right to embrace a vision of Hollister as a place of destination, a place of distinction, a place a cut above where visitors, tourists, citizens, and families can celebrate in an environment that fosters camaraderie and a place to be enjoyed by people of all ages and walks of life.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And I want to say to you and the other two committee members, I think you were looking at some written remarks, and if you want to submit those to staff, we would love to have them. We are taking notes, but anything you want to give us in writing would be welcome. Any comments at this time from Councilmember Resendez or Mayor Velasquez?
None at this time, thank you.
I'll add to what Mr. Huboy said, and I think Mr. Huboy and myself have spoken for many, many years about smart growth and planning for our community. He went over a lot of those details. I think it's very important and to understand, and I absolutely agree, we need as much public participation as possible from the citizens that actually live here and have to face that daily commute every day and that traffic. It's interesting, the changes with the Senate bill you talked about, but the goal here is how do we create a community that we're proud to live in and can spend as much time as possible living in our community by creating jobs nearby and planning in ways that our community can use our parks or different areas to enjoy the life that they have here and have an affordable community first for our residents before we continue on the path of just the sprawl that's been happening. So the goal is from our community, from our city and our county, is how do we develop a community that we can afford to live in, not only the residents, but the government can actually afford to pay for the bills to keep it up in a way that we can be proud of it. So that is another major, major component, because the road costs are out of control in a way that we can't afford to keep up. And of course, the ongoing maintenance. So we want to figure out a newer, smart growth type of community, smart city that makes sense. And there's so many great visions out there. And I think that's actually one of the reasons we chose your company. You guys have a lot of good ideas out there, and that's what we want to implement here and start stepping back from the idea of just more sprawl, more single family homes. But let's start building communities, as Mr. Huboy mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that would conclude this item, unless there is any of the three GPAC members who wants to make any final comment. Otherwise, we'll move on to our first action item. All right, could we put the slides back up? Okay, and our next item, and the first action item, if we can have the next slide, is a consideration of the chair and vice chair. This is a brand new committee, and so it would be up to the GPAC to elect a chair and vice chair. There is a council resolution that establishes the GPAC and says that there shall be a chair and vice chair. The role of the chair will be to open and close the meeting, to facilitate as the chair sees appropriate, and to ensure that the meeting follows the proper process. It is the recommendation from staff and the consultant team that you allow us, and me in particular, to continue to facilitate the meetings. Just because I've done this for many years, for many, many general plans, I'm happy to serve as the resource person for presentations and facilitation, but I will, of course, work closely with the elected chair, or in his absence, the vice chair, to ensure that the meeting is open properly, closed properly, and that the meeting follows all proper process at all times. So with that said, again, we would go into that same process. Any questions or initial comments from the three GPAC members, then any public input that there might be, and then finally, presumably a motion and vote by the GPAC itself.
Thank you.
Yes. Anything from the GPAC before we open it, ask for any public?
Are you asked for the nominations now or to the public first?
I guess it would be up to you. I don't feel in a position to tell you not to make a nomination. If you would like to hear any public comment, we could hear that first.
I would like to nominate Mr. Huboy as vice chair.
Accept.
Okay.
I will second that. Are we seconding?
Yes, you should follow.
But further discussion on that, on the nomination from Ignacio. We did have some comment that it may be prudent to hold off on this until we talk about the vacancies and have a full GPAC committee. Just a thought.
Well, I want to move through the process we're in right now, and I'd be happy to talk about that when we get to that point. So I believe there was a second for that nomination.
All right, so we'll consider that once we have public comment, and we certainly don't need to do this now, but does anyone want to make a nomination for chair at this time, or would you like to wait till you've heard public comment?
I'd like to make a nomination for Ignacio, the Mayor Ignacio Velasquez as chair.
Thank you.
I'll second the nomination.
All right, so we have a motion and a second vote for Mayor Velasquez as chair and Commissioner Huboy as vice chair. Is there any other discussion that any of you would like to make before we open it up for public comment? And then we'll obviously come back to you before you vote.
No, I do want to say I appreciate you pointing out how you will still be basically leading this through to the end here. It's not that the chair or the vice chair makes the decisions. It's just part of a process. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Then let's go and ask if there are any people in the council chambers who are asking to speak on this item.
We have none.
None, all right. There are also no hands raised. John Casey has raised his hand. So we'll take, and again, I want to remind everyone that there is still a next item to talk about the vacancies on the committee. But right now, if there are comments about chair and vice chair, we will take those at this time. The first person is John Casey.
Hi, my name is John Casey. I'm a resident of Hollister. I agree with David Huboy. I think this is premature until all seats are full. That being said, if you must move forward, I request David Huboy be elected as chair. I've known David for a long time, and I believe him to be a man of integrity who will support and look for diverse and varied opinions on how the plan moves forward. So I'd ask for consideration of the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Mia Casey.
Hello, this is Mia Casey from Hollister also. I am echoing the sentiments of David Huboy. It's premature to be electing chairs and vice chairs when you only have 3 of your 5 members. That said, I also agree that David Huboy is the most experienced person on that committee and has been through a process before and would be an excellent chair. So that would be my thought anyway. Thank you.
All right. There are no other hands raised. Is there anyone else in the council chambers seeking to speak right now? No one else. All right. I'll just say for the record, I think it probably goes without saying, but having heard some comments that it would be premature to elect someone, if there is not a majority vote on either of these 2 items, that would effectively defer a decision until another time. I want to say from a staff and consultant perspective that we certainly wanted to bring this issue up as the very first issue because the resolution establishing this committee by the City Council says that there will be a chair and vice chair elected by the committee. I think it would be the committee's prerogative to defer that. I'm not recommending that one way or another, but just wanted to say for the record to make sure everyone's clear on this, that you could not pass these motions and then you would be without a chair until there were a further motion to do that at a future meeting. So with that said, let me open it up for any comment and then we will take the votes. I would suggest that you vote first on the chair and then second on the vice chair and do them obviously as majority votes. But I think we could take comments on both items together and then do again the vote first on chair and then the vote on vice chair. Anyone have any comments before we take the votes?
I did want to add, I know we're going to talk about the other problem next, but we need to move on. It would be great to have the other issues settled, but they're not going to be settled. So we as a committee need to move on and start moving through this process.
I also I appreciate the comments from me and John Casey, and I think it is important to say is that the GPAC committee, when we go through this general plan update process, is that we find commonalities and emphasize positive direction for the city. And I know we have different viewpoints on items, but I think that with respecting our difference of opinions on some of these subjects, and having civil discussions, I think we can be very productive. And I've known Ignacio for a long time. We may not agree on everything, but gosh, I've got a lot of, I do have a lot of respect for his vision. I think he's going to be a valuable member of this committee as a chairperson. I did second that nomination. I did make and I do agree that we could, we could postpone it, but I think, again, I think we need to move on and we need to go forward in a positive way. So I'll go ahead and keep my second to Roland's nomination for Ignacio's chairperson, and so we can move on.
Other comments?
Other than, I agree with both of the other committee members, and I think we should just move forward to a vote.
Great. All right. Well, in that case, let me ask for a vote regarding the nomination of Ignacio Velasquez as the committee chair. I'd just go down the roll of the three voters and hear from each of you. Mr. Mayor, your vote?
Aye.
Councilmember Resendez?
Aye.
Commissioner Huboy?
Aye.
The motion passes 3-0. And now on the nomination of Commissioner Huboy as committee vice chair, Mr. Mayor?
Aye.
Councilmember Resendez?
Aye.
Commissioner Huboy?
Yes.
All right, so that also passes 3-0. Congratulations to both of you. Thank you for taking on those roles. Mr. Mayor, if it's appropriate, I will continue to move us through tonight's agenda unless you want to add anything or take over from here.
No, absolutely. Continue, please.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your confidence in allowing me to do that. Let's move on then to our next slide and our next item. Next slide. The next item, and we've heard a number of speakers already allude to this tonight, is the fact that there are right now 2 seats vacant on the GPAC. One of those, through the council's resolution, is intended for a planning commissioner. The other is for a member of the public at large. Just to give a little background on this item, the Planning Commission did at one point make a nomination of 2 commissioners, one of which was Commissioner Huboy, the other commissioner, and this was, as I understand it, actually even approved by the council, but that commissioner has since left the Planning Commission, and hence there is not a second Planning Commissioner member from the Planning Commission. So the GPAC could make a recommendation to the council, either, as I understand it, because it's not otherwise called out, they could either directly request that the Planning Commission make a nomination, that the council make a direct appointment, or the GPAC could nominate one of the commissioners to serve. There is also a slot for one member of the public at large. There was a previous city process to look for nominations for that role. There was previously through that process, several people asked to be considered. It's my understanding that at this time, several of those people have moved out of town, and there's only one person who was nominated or nominated himself who remains as a possible candidate. So in that case, it could be possible to for the GPAC to suggest that that one person be approved. The GPAC could also recommend to the City Council that it undertake a new search for a member of the public to serve. And of course, the commission could, the GPAC could remain silent on either of these issues and allow them to be taken up directly by the City Council at the time that the city council wants to consider them. It is, I think, clearly in the charter of the GPAC that it's ultimately the city council's decision to appoint people to these 2 vacant seats. So that would ultimately need to occur on a majority vote of the city council. So that's my understanding of the situation. Again, following our standard procedure here, I would open it up for committee questions that might arise. Then we'll open it up for public comment, and then go back to the GPAC to determine if an action is desired. If so, it would be made by motion and then considered and voted on.
Thank you. Let me make clarifications because some of the information was incorrect. And this has been probably the disappointing part of selecting the GPAC and moving forward. It's been a long process to just get to this point. Mr. Huboy knows we've been trying to get here for about 5 years. The Planning Commission actually selected a member of their commission to be the member along with Mr. Huboy. That was clear. That commissioner is actually still on board. Matter of fact, she had spoken earlier, Mrs. Stevens. So that person was chosen by the Planning Commission, is ready and willing to serve. Unfortunately, the City Council vote of 2-2 did not let that proceed, which is very unfortunate. She's a very intelligent person that has a good vision, and that was disappointing that it became political. The member at large was a person that put their name in a while back with a few others that applied at the time. One eventually became a council member, and one, I believe, moved or did something else or became, I don't know, another commission. But the one person that was still there is extremely knowledgeable about planning and is an absolutely excellent choice. No connection to anyone that I know of. And unfortunately, the council again decided that by 2-2 vote that person was not the person, or at least the majority couldn't decide on it, but the person was very, very capable of being on this commission. It was saddening to me that a person of such quality, a resident in our city, could be told that basically, yes, you went through all the hoops, all the obstacles, you did everything, you attended, you met with everybody, and yet we don't want you and we'll start again. We want to find somebody else. So that was disappointing. I'm hoping this GPAC could appoint that person, and hopefully somehow we can appoint the other planning commissioners so we can move together as a full board. I would really love to see that, and I'm hoping we can do that somehow.
Also, if I might say a few words about that too, because I was chairman when Gabriel Torres, who was the other member that was previously elected through the Planning Commission to be a member of this committee, was no longer a commissioner. We had 2 very capable commissioners who were interested in that position and gave presentations. We all voted on the winner. It was very close, but it was Roxanne Stevens who got the nod from the commission to fill that seat. And unfortunately, as Mayor Ignacio has stated, that it didn't go through because it was a deadlock 2-2 vote. That was along with the other delegate from the general public that wanted to serve. So it doesn't make sense to go back to the Planning Commission when we already have the representative that went through the process, and it's Roxanne Stevens who got the nomination from the commission. So I just wanted to make that very clear.
And I want to apologize. What the 2 of you have said, I did know that, and I somehow failed to say it. The process, Commissioner Huboy, that you just mentioned was the one I was alluding to. There was a previous appointee, and he left the commission, but you're absolutely right. There was a subsequent vote by the Planning Commission to nominate Ms. Stevens, and I want to apologize to the public and to Ms. Stevens, who is here, that I did forget that set of details. And I do concur. I just want to say for the record, I absolutely concur that what you have said is correct. With that said, shall we open it up for public comment on this, or are there other GPAC members wanting to speak or ask questions now?
I'd like to comment briefly, if I
Yes,
may.
please.
Thank you. So I was fortunate enough to watch both of the processes take place. I don't think I was there in person, but I did see, and I really do appreciate how fair and how transparent the process was through the Planning Commission. I think, if I recall, Mr. Huboy, you might be able to correct me, but both of these people were very much interested, and they gave speeches, and there was a voting. They scored each other, and ultimately Roxanne, Miss Commissioner Stevens, was the one that was voted on. So I think, and then what happened with the City Council, I mean, ultimately, I think at this point, it's just time to move on. It's very unfortunate that politics and self-interest get in the way of, and ultimately hurt the community of having a very fair process take place and very qualified individuals on the committees. So at this point, I just think we just need to move forward with the 3 that we have, and we'll take it from there. So thank you.
I also want to thank you, Roland. And I do want to say is that I would really be very, very grateful if we could get more representation on this committee. And if there was some way that we could fill that other, well, at least 2 vacant seats. I know there's been some discussion about broadening it to other members from the public, but if there was a way we could, and I don't know how that can be done, but if there was a way that we could bring Roxanne on board with another member of the public, I think that would build a better committee. It would at least bring more of a broader representation of ideas that we can have a conversation about and see if we can build a consensus.
I absolutely do not disagree with you. I think that was the intent. However, at this point, I don't see that happening. I really don't. And I just think it's just best to move on at this point. Ultimately, the reason why is because it needs to go back to the council to get ratified. Do you understand, Commissioner Huboy? And that's just not going to happen.
I just want to point out, it is a shame. Again, it was a very fair process. And I personally have an issue with changing the process when you do not get the outcome you were hoping for, especially when you had 2 very talented, dedicated people that wanted to be involved in the community that had no connections to anyone. That was the surprising part of this whole issue. Now, if the council would like to bring it back and vote on those individuals, I have absolutely no problem, and I would love to see it because I think it is important. But I think it would not be fair to say, we're going to change the rules and do it again, do a do-over here. And that's just part of something I don't want to be involved with. But if the GPAC wants to recommend that the council re-examine or relook at seating those 2 empty seats, I'm 100% in favor of it. And I hope at this point that they would be willing to understand this is for the community. These are people dedicated to their community. And we do need to move forward in a fair process. And this process starts from the very beginning with being upfront and honest to the public and not having any special agendas going on. Because if we start in the wrong way of changing rules to fit agendas, we're going to fail. We're going to get through this process halfway and start to fail. This has to be a fair process from the very beginning. And again, those 2 people were absolutely perfect to play this role, and it was disappointing. So I would say, as a GPAC, absolutely, let's recommend back to the City Council to vote on those 2 positions again, and hopefully there's a different outcome and we move forward. If not, I will not be in favor of changing rules to get a different outcome.
If I could just remind you all that we will be taking public comment on this, and of course you can continue to discuss now, but whenever you're ready, you can hear the public and then come back to your discussion.
I'll say this. I'd like to go along and concur with the mayor and his proposal to bring that back and agendize it for a future city council meeting and see if that can be reconsidered. It may be more difficult and to change the structure of the committee to branch out to more people from the general public. But again, you had a very capable commissioner in Roxanne Stevens.
And if I can, I do not have the faith in the current council to make that decision. But I'm willing to go ahead and compromise and to allow that to happen and to agree to that to happen, but nothing further than that at this time.
Okay.
All right, well, shall we take public comment then, if there is any? There are 2 hands raised. Let me ask first, though, those are virtual hands. Is there anyone in the council chambers asking to speak on this issue?
We have one person.
Okay. Take that speaker, and then we'll take John Casey and Mia Casey, whose hands are up.
Okay, thank you. I first want to just ask a question. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. Well, I'll just go ahead and make a statement. So my question is, are we, at this point in public comment, are we allowed to talk about the current composition of the GPAC, or is that off limits to this agenda item?
I can't quite hear you, but if your question is, are you allowed to talk about something, I think anything germane to this agenda topic is allowed at this time.
Okay. So what I wanted to point out was some facts about the appointments to the current people on the GPAC. So the first thing I wanted to point out was that on February 5th, 2018, the City Council meeting, Resolution 2018-27, it was passed to form the GPAC and also adopt a set of bylaws that were included in the general packet. And the resolution 2018-27 states the general plan advisory committee shall consist of 5 members appointed by the City Council. That's key, appointed by the City Council, and will be comprised of 2 City Hollister Planning Commissioners, 2 City Council members, and 1 member of the public. Next point is, at that same meeting, Councilmember Friend and Mayor Velasquez were appointed to the committee by consensus. So they were, at that point, they were not appointed by the mayor alone. And then the next point is the bylaws that are currently governing this GPAC. Item number 5 states vacancies. Vacancies created by resignation or removal for non-attendance may be filled both by the City Council for the remainder of the term. So I want to point out that the resignation of Councilmember Friend left a vacancy that needed to be filled by the City Council. So I believe that the action taken by the mayor on April 20th City Council meeting of this year was to unilaterally appoint Councilmember Resendez to the GPAC, and that's a violation of the resolution 2018-27. And it's also not consistent with how the appointments were made previously, because the appointments that were made before Councilmember Friend and Mayor Velasquez, it was made by consensus. But at the April 20th meeting, there was no consensus on the council members who were appointed to the GPAC. So I just wanted to make those points.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else in the council chambers wishing to speak?
That's it.
All right, then we will go to the first hand raised virtually, and that is Mr. John Casey.
Good evening, GPAC members, city staff, and consultants. My name is John Casey, and I'm a resident of Hollister. Thank you for allowing this level of public input to the process, although I think a lot more is needed. In the county general plan that took more than 6 years to adopt, it appears folks running for office, for example, Colin Kaminsky, believe not enough public input was put into the county plan. I don't want us to be put this together only to be hearing that same issue later. 3 members is just not enough, especially folks having similar viewpoints on growth, in essence, stacking the committee. I think there was an error and misunderstanding made during the April 20th City Council meeting that allowed this to happen, and that needs to be corrected. Otherwise, I feel this plan will go nowhere, and the city will find itself on the other side of referendums and lawsuits. Again, that said, for the public at large position, I'd like to have a new search and know how and in what form the public participant request will be put out in the notices, how will it go out. I, as a resident of Hollister, would be interested in putting my name into and forward for the public at large position. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. The next speaker is Mia Casey.
Hi there. Okay, so I would echo what Kevin Henderson had said regarding the resolution and the manner of appointment of Councilman Resendez. I do agree with the idea of opening up for the public at large. I would love to see more citizen representation and input. I think it's very important. I do have a suggestion because I did attend the April 20 meeting, and it was very confusing because the agenda item was not to appoint the planning commissioner. It was to appoint the planning commissioner and the public at large person. I don't think that there was any problem with the planning commissioner appointment. I felt like that process was very thorough, and she was recommended by the commission, and I didn't have any problem with her whatsoever. But the public at large position, there were 3 candidates that applied. I think it was advertised in the freelance. I never knew about it. I don't read the freelance. So the fact that one person moved away and the other person became a city council member left one person behind. And I'm not saying anything in regards to his qualifications. It's just that there is more going on these days with public land use, and there are a lot of interested people. And I just think it would be worth going back out and letting people apply and seeing what kind of input you get. If you're truly, truly interested in having, citizens be part of this process. So that's my recommendation. If you brought the planning commissioner back as a separate agenda item, I don't think you would get an argument because she sounds like, she's been vetted and is, worth putting on the committee. I would like to see the public at large position, though, go back out and get people involved. It seems like a smart thing to do. Anyways, thank you for listening.
Thank you. The next hand raised is Elia Salinas.
Sorry, I unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I too echo Kevin Henderson. Thank you very much for what you stated, and I was there at that meeting. So the resolution or the ordinance from 2018 was to be appointed by City Council, and I think there was a misrepresentation, misinformation with regards to how the city attorney interpreted it. It specifically states that it's going to be appointed by the City Council, and the mayor has taken it upon himself that he appointed, and realistically, the mayor does not have that power based on what the ordinance states, the bylaws. Roland Resendez, he appointed Roland Resendez, and Honor Spencer, Councilman Spencer was willing to take on the position. And having Honor Spencer instead of Roland Resendez and the mayor are both on the same page when it comes to growth for our community, and they're both against it. Now, Mr. Early from Platesworks, you must at least agree with us that you should have all different people tied to be giving you input, and having Councilman Resendez and having the mayor on the same. You're not going to get anything other than what the mayor wants. I think that also with regards to appointing the public, I think that the city should, you have the duty to the entire community to appoint more people, more input. The County Board of Supervisors had more than one at-large person, and I think that the city should follow it. If you want a fair representation of the entire community, I believe that each council person should be able to appoint a person from their district to be able to be on this committee. That would be the fair thing to do, to get an input from all aspects of the entire community instead of you have one person. And I am completely against having that one person appointed whom you claim to be well qualified. He's got a great resume, but at the same time, he's team Ignacio Velasquez. He also is against growth. You have an entire committee right now that is already anti-growth, and you're not going to get, how are you going to get a general plan, you know, for what we believe is for the best interest of the community and the entire city of Hollister when they're all on the same page? I think we need to go back and we need to actually to replace Councilman Resendez and replace him with Councilwoman Honor Spencer. I think actually once in, you know, we go through this, Carol Lenore, Councilman Lenore, once she's off the city council, she has so much knowledge when it comes to the planning and what's been going on in there.
I'm sorry, that's your 3 minutes. Did you wrap up?
Well, I just want to completely emphasize the fact that we should open it up to more people and it would help the PlaceWorks get this project going with more people input with the community and not just sticking to the one person.
All right.
Thank you for, I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Yeah, again, we do want to emphasize the 3-minute time limit. I'm going to be trying to enforce that.
Can I respond to the previous speaker?
What I'd prefer to do is that we will take whatever comments there are still, and then if you want to keep a note, you'll be welcome to respond to speakers once we turn it back to the GPAC for comment. So we have, I guess, just one hand up right now, and that is from Bill Lee.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
In the interest of saving everyone time, I just want to second the comment that Ms. Salinas just made. I'm in complete agreement with what she said, and it sounds like David may have a response to that, so I'll wait and hear that response. So rather than saying the same things over, I just want to go on record that I feel the same way. Thank you.
All right. And then we now have a hand, and I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused. Carminder Brown had her hand up, it went down, but you have not yet spoken. Is that right, Ms. Brown? If you, assuming you haven't, you're welcome. We'll recognize you now.
Thank you. And I just want to make clear that I'm making this very brief comment on behalf of myself only, as a resident of Hollister of 16 years, and not as a representative of any organization that I do work for. I just want to say that I was really excited to learn that this process was happening, was finally getting launched. And I'm someone that has been very, very involved in our community for many years. And I have networks of people, you know, all across San Benito County in different types of work and from different communities. And I was really looking forward to trying to get more people engaged in this process, because I think it's really important. And it is disappointing to me that there's not a full committee. My main concern with that is that the entire process, once it's complete, will lack credibility with the residents of Hollister if they know that there was only 3 of the intended 5 committee members. So I will second what some of the other speakers have said, that I think it's very important to fill the other 2 seats and to have more people aware of the opportunity to put themselves forward for the public at large position. Thank you.
All right, that concludes the speakers who've raised their hands. Are there any others in the council chambers?
No others.
No others, all right, and there are no hands raised. I'm gonna turn it back to the GPAC. I do wanna say very briefly to the GPAC and to the public that I too, and I think all the GPAC members have said this as well as many members of the public, I would love to have a fuller committee. I'm certainly not in a position to say how that should occur, but I think I've heard everyone say that they wish that there could be a 5-member committee at this point. So I think we're all in agreement there. I do also want to assure both the members of the public and the committee that we at PlaceWorks see our role to make sure that we have the broadest participation possible, not only through the GPAC, but also through the public involvement processes. So whether we unfortunately stay with a committee of only 3 for the foreseeable future, or if we are able to add 1 or 2 members, or if there were any change to the composition of the committee, regardless of what happens in that regard, PlaceWorks will do everything it can to make sure that this is a very representative process and that all points of view are heard. And I believe, you know, what little I know of the 3 GPAC members, I think they too are very, very willing and desiring to hear from all aspects of the community as this moves forward. And then finally, I would just point out that this is a general plan advisory committee, emphasis on the word advisory, and that ultimately this general plan does need to go before the Planning Commission and ultimately the City Council, and that will be the body that really does have to ratify it. And one of the things we're going to rely on the GPAC for is that they give us good guidance about what the council itself can and will adopt. And we want to make sure that it is a general plan as it gets drafted that does receive the political support of the council members so that we can get a majority vote at both the Planning Commission and the council. And that's another thing that I'll be working very hard to do. So I just wanted to make those comments just to paint a picture of how we at PlaceWorks and the consultant team as a whole see our role. With that, let me turn it over to the GPAC members, and at some point, if one of you wants to, you can make a motion, or if no motion is made, it would just be up to the City Council to figure out how to move this forward or if to move it forward. Committee members, who would like to speak?
David, I need to respond to Ilya's comment about my position on growth. I just can only speak for myself. I am not anti-growth. And I said in one of the key issues that I'm a proponent of smart growth. And the biggest challenge is building consensus. I want to build consensus based on community input. I want them to take ownership in this process. I'm for extending the representation on this committee. I don't know how feasibly that can be done, but I would like to see those 2 positions filled. And I appreciate Ilya's comments regarding that, and also John and Mia Casey's comments and Bill Lee's comments, and I'll just let it go at that. I just want to clarify my position on growth. I'm a proponent of smart growth principles. There's 10 principles of smart growth, and I'm not going to take the time to go through each one of those principles, but I've always been a proponent of that. From the first general plan is to learn that we can't gain anything through sprawl. If we're going to grow, it has to grow from the urban centers. That's what we learned from the problems that we had with our infrastructure prior to the 2005 general plan. We went through a moratorium. I don't want that to happen again. So I just want to clarify my position. Thank you.
If I may make a comment, please.
Please.
I want to echo the same sentiment as Commissioner Huboy. I appreciate everyone that that made a comment during public comment right now, and people that are rewatching this as well. But I've got to make my position very clear. I do not think it's a good idea, especially after hearing the public comment. I'm sorry, but I do not think it's a good idea and a good use of our staff's time, our council's time. I think it's been decided upon. I have so much faith in PlaceWorks to not only engage, but to come up with a legitimate general plan for our community. And I would rather see us focus on really engaging the public at large and getting them involved than having to go back and have this discussion again. I'm not completely opposed to it, but I just don't think right now is the good time. A better time to consider going back to the council would be after the November election. So after hearing the public comment and having a little bit more time to think this through, I just would strongly advise for us not to go back to the council or the planning commission. I also must be honest with you guys and say we've already had 2 planning commissions make public comments, and now we've got a 3rd who is out at the chambers making another one. I'm a little bit concerned about a Brown Act violation especially if this is going to go back to the Planning Commission. So I'm learning more as we go here, but we need to be very cautious that we don't make any mistakes here. Anyways, that's my recommendation. It's just not a good use of our time. It's not a good use of the council's time. And I'm tired of wasting the staff's time. We need to move forward with this. Let's revisit it after the next election, and let's really focus on getting the public involved in this process as much as possible. Thank you.
Okay, I'll make a comment now. I will agree absolutely with Councilmember Resenda's comments, especially after hearing some of the other comments. Mr. Hugh Boy has been a man with a vision in this community for a long time, and that vision has always been the same. How do we build a smarter, better community? He knows that's been my vision for years and years and years. Yet over and over, there's a group of people that keep claiming we are anti-growth or misleading the public, knowingly misleading the public over and over again. And, you know, I mentioned something earlier about people having to disclose their ties with developers. That should be happening because some of those comments were those tied to developers or that want to develop in the near future. So we need to be honest on this from the very beginning, and to go back and try to change rules to try to get somebody that fits what you want to accomplish is not why we're doing this general plan. I've said this over and over again. It's been over 5 years that I've been asking for this update. 5 years. And yet here we are still, those looking for a way to keep it from moving forward. It is not fair to our community. We know we need to make this update. It would be great if the two people that had been chosen or applied and did everything right had been chosen, but they weren't for whatever reasons that they came up with at the time. The accusations of being in my pocket is so incredibly unfair to those individuals that have spent their lives building their own careers and doing things that make their lives, their family lives, and their community better. To be accused of something just outright false, we can't keep doing it. And that's why I have to agree with Mr. Resendez. It's just going back with that kind of discussion, it's just not going to work. And I really am going to start asking that we really have to have people disclose their ties to development. And it's okay that they have ties to development, but it needs to be upfront because we can't keep hearing accusations and misinformation. It's just going to make this process a long, drawn-out process of hate. And we don't need to go there because the public is looking for us to do the right thing. The public, not special interests. Let's please remember that. It is our community, and we need to make sure we're doing this right. And I absolutely have the confidence in PlaceWorks to do what you need to do to get us there. And I look forward to it. And we're just going to have to move on. And just as Mr. Resendez says, we're just going to need to move on and not keep rehashing this.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I think I heard from both the mayor and Councilmember Resendez what boils down to a desire to take no action at this time. So I just want to verify, is there any member of the GPAC who would want to make a motion at this point?
Make a motion not to take any action?
I actually just thought if none of you make a motion, you will have taken no action. So I don't think you need to make a motion to take no action.
That's correct.
I am asking just to close the item. I'm guessing the answer might be no, but I wanted to ask, is there any GPAC member who does want to make a motion for an action? All right, I hear none. Does anyone, I think we can move on unless one of the GPAC members wants to make a motion.
If I might say I thought there was one, I just want to continue the conversation on
Please, absolutely.
The possibility of putting on a future agenda for the City Council to have Roxanne Stevens as a candidate for our committee.
So to fill at least one of the two seats with Roxanne Stevens. All right.
I'm not willing to even go there at this time. I'm sorry. I'm gonna not be in favor of that.
I don't know that would leave Mr. Mayor. I don't know, Commissioner Huboy, if you want to make a formal motion and see if you get a second, or we could just ask the mayor how he would vote.
I can make my comment now. I'm going to agree with Councilmember Resendez. I heard the same set of lies again, and I don't want to go through it over and over and over again, because every time we have to hear the same things, and when one of us speaks out, it's again because we're liars, and enough's enough, and I don't want to be part of that kind of a process any longer.
And I just don't think it's good for our staff. I don't think it's good for the city council, just to go through that again. So it's unfortunate, but it is what it is. The council had the chance to make that decision. They voted against it. So I really think we just need to lay that to rest. I'm completely willing to look at that in November after the upcoming election.
Any final comments? All right, I think then that we can go on then. There won't be an action on this item. Our last action item is the list and map of draft study intersections. Of course, traffic and traffic congestion is a very important issue in Hollister. For that reason, the general plan will include an assessment of a number of intersections within the city. The scope of work that we've put together covers analysis of 30 such intersections, and they are listed on this list on this slide, and they are mapped as well. I recognize that the map in particular is a little hard to read, but I think those of you who are looking for a certain location can see the red dots at each location. They're actually red crosses, and there is a text list as well, and we did publish this list in advance of the meeting, so I'm hoping at least the GPAC members have had a chance to review it. I do want to let you know that staff and consultants have looked at this list very closely. We considered a list of over 50 intersections for possible analysis. The scope is limited to 30, so we tried to choose the 30 that we felt were most appropriate and most important to study within that budgeting constraint of 30 intersections. What we're hoping to hear from you tonight is ultimately that you would approve this set of intersections for study so that we can move them forward into the formal traffic analysis. And again, we'll follow the protocol we've already been following. I can take questions from the GPAC members, then we will take public comment, and then we'll turn it back to the GPAC. And in this case, we really would like a motion. It may require some modifications, but we do hope to finish tonight's meeting with an approved list of 30 study intersections. So any questions or initially from the GPAC?
Yes, I have some questions. I see several of those marked along Fairview Road. That is a county road, and I'm concerned why we'd be reviewing those intersections. And also I see some on the southern end along Southside Road and some of the other roads that are in the county. Now I know it's an overview of the entire area, but I think part of the issues we're having in this community is, obviously it's why we're doing this, is the traffic patterns and the congestion, but we have those issues within the city. We need to figure out how to make that flow better within the city rather than worrying about some of those other areas just outside of those where we need to look at what is going to happen obviously in the future, but we have to be focused, I think, within the city areas.
All right. Well, let me take that as a question, and I'll try and answer it. And Frederick Venter from our traffic consultant, Kimberly Horn, who many of you know, is here as well, and he might want to add something. But let me just say that you're actually required both under sort of the principles of good planning, but also under state law to assess environmental and traffic impacts without regard to the jurisdiction in which they occur. Now that's changed slightly because CEQA has changed, and you're no longer required to do an intersection level of service analysis anywhere inside or outside the city. But to the extent that these are environmental impacts, your charge under the law, your requirement under the law is to assess impacts regardless of whether they're inside the city or not. So we have tried to put this list together in a way that we're covering intersections, whether inside the city limits or out, that are of concern to to residents in the city, but also to residents surrounding the city who might be impacted by these issues. And we did try and hold them in pretty close to the city of Hollister, but we didn't particularly limit ourselves to those that are inside the city limits right now. Certainly we could change that, again, because of the changes in state law. You know, a year ago, I'd have told you you're absolutely required to look at intersections both inside and outside the city if you could have an impact there. Now with this change, you're not absolutely required to do that, but I would still advise that it's good planning and it's good neighborliness towards the county, both the unincorporated county lands and the county as a governmental institution to consider that, but to consider those intersections. But it would be up to you as a committee. And I do want to call on Frederick or perhaps Danny from city staff as well, if one of them wants to add to anything I just said in terms of explaining why we have intersections outside the city limits.
No, and I just, so clarification for you. It's not that I understand that part of it. It's just that I'm seeing, I think you said you limited it to 30.
That's right.
And I'm seeing several places within the city that aren't addressed here. That's the only reason. If we had more opportunities, I get it. And it's, again, it's not that I'm absolutely against that. I'm just seeing spaces within the city first that need to be addressed that are an issue.
All right. Well, we can certainly look at removing some of the ones that you feel are less important, whether they're in the city or out, and swapping them out for some that are in the city. Before we do that, I would like to call on both Frederick and or Danny if you do want to add anything, and we can then take other questions and comments, take the public comment, and then come back and have a discussion about whether you want to make changes to this list.
But David, before we have comments from Danny, am I correct to say that all these intersections are within the planning boundary, right?
Yes, they are all well within the planning area.
Planning area?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, David. This is Frederick. Yeah, so that was my very first comment. Well within the planning area for the city. Number two is also, remember, we anticipate some growth, and so I think we've also tried to select these intersections where we do anticipate growth happening. You know, we know Fairview Road is used by a lot of people to commute northwards and also cross over to get to 25. So, but yes, we're open to if there's more important intersections within the city that the GPAC feel we should rather study and not look at these ones that are in the county. You know, we are open to that discussion.
Dick, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, hello. I wanted to say, since they're in the sphere of influence or the planning area, are these areas that we can work with both the county and developers in the future on?
Absolutely. So the next, you know, once we address the improvements that will be at these intersections that will need to happen because of the future development or congestion that will occur, the next step is that they will actually go make it into the fee program. And currently, you know, between the county and the city, there's a common fee program to collect traffic fees from developers, right, at these intersections. So yes, there is a benefit in the coherence of how the governance is structured around and within Hollister.
So I think the mayor brings up a good point. Since we do have we're only limited to 30, these areas are all potential areas that we can collaborate with other partners. I'm not opposed to eliminating some of those on the outskirts and then focusing it and bringing some of those in where there's not going to be that opportunity to collaborate with both the county and developers. So I'd really rather focus more on infilling than looking over at the outskirts, so to speak. So I think that's a good plan.
All right. Any other preliminary comments or questions?
I have another comment. When you chose these intersections, did you go through? I know we mentioned the Senate Bill SB 743. Did you evaluate these intersections in relation to current level of service?
No, we have.
Did that come into?
Well, if I could add here, and Frederick,
No.
do correct me, but and add to this, I think that Frederick started to say
no.
no.
The previous general plan.
Frederick started to say no, and it's true. We have not done a recent level of service analysis yet. And what we're asking you is to approve the list where we'll start that analysis. And at the same time, these were studied, or these were chosen because we think that they are points where either or both there are or will be congestion issues and or where there will at least be relatively high volumes that are important to understand in understanding the city's overall traffic flows. So that is the basis on which they were proposed.
Just trying to get the comprehension of how these intersections came to about here that we're being presented with, and what was the manner of interpretation.
Yeah, Frederick, do you want to add to that? Again, I would say that they were chosen based on either, although no analysis has been done recently, either some background information and knowledge that they are areas of congestion or high traffic flows, and or that they are areas that because of the amount of traffic that comes into them from various directions, that they're likely to become important points in the future.
Correct, David, you just said it. And also where we know there's going to be future congestion, right? We and also from working in the city, you know, some concerns from the community and also in consultation with staff.
Hi, this is Danny. That's correct, Frederick. We were looking at areas that we do have known problems of congestion and circulation. However, if it's the committee's desire for us to look at those outlying intersections, I guess we could do that also.
All right.
If I could make a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
Frederick and Danny, maybe you can help me here, but I know along Fairview, a lot of those intersections you have marked, I believe they're already installing signal lights at a few of those, and the county has done a few studies because of the growth they've had in those areas. As a member of the Council of Governments, I've been involved as far as the roads, the traffic patterns, and you know, the issues with Enterprise Road, or not Enterprise, but Airline in that area going towards Fairview. These are big ticket dollar items that, you know, create another problem. And I know the county has studied them and is working with some of the developers to implement signal lights in these areas. So I think a lot of that work's been done, Frederick. And I get that you want to go back and pick up a little bit more of that information to see the traffic patterns. But I think one of the questions, one of the things I did like the discussions was, how do we create a flow within the community so we can get to the point of having people start using or walk or bicycling in a way that's a safe way for them to get around town. And that's, as our conversations in the past, Frederick, have been about how do we create a community more urbanized within and safe enough where people feel comfortable to use other methods of transportation within. So that's why I'm pointing out some of the outer ones, because I know those studies have been done, and I'm sure you can just pick up that information pretty quickly from the county.
That's actually a great point. Have we looked into that? Have we talked to COG, or have we talked to county to see, so we're not doubling our work and wasting resources?
No, we haven't discussed with the county about duplication, but you know, you are correct that there are studies around the city happening where these intersections are being studied, and you know, if we can find that there's consistency between at least maybe a screening exercise with our general plan model and the general plan volumes and the existing volumes between what has been studied in recent analysis, you know, and if we could incorporate some of those in the general plan on a qualitative discussion and say, listen, we extract this from a certain project and that's the future cumulative, you know, then that's maybe a way to do it as well, to not go and analyze it and count it, but just incorporate it from another document, you know, as long, you know, and maybe David, a little bit of guidance there, but that is a way we can do it, and then not study it now, but study another one, but just incorporate it by default or by just citing it and referencing it from another document.
Frederick, can I ask you and maybe Carrie as well? You know, we wanted an action on this tonight, but as I announced earlier, we know that the whole process is being delayed some because of the issues in collecting data. Would it be, I'm realizing we don't have another GPAC meeting scheduled for a few months, but could this, do we have to get a decision tonight, or is there a way that we could, if we say scheduled an extra meeting, even if it's a very brief meeting, to bring back a list in 3 or 4 weeks? Would that slow us down, or do we want to try and do this tonight?
I'm totally in your hands. I mean, for me, the next step, to get the data is to have the. Right now, we have the 30 intersections. We are going to use historic data for the bulk of them, but for many of them, we need to do the big data collection, which is a little bit of a delay. You know, for me, it's just extending my work a little bit, and I'm okay with that. So if we feel we need to revisit the list and come back with some options or answer some of these questions, I'm open to doing it, David.
Frederick, I'm sorry to digress here, but just to clarify, it's just so the committee understands, we are slowed down because the traffic data that we're going to be collecting because of COVID-19 has to be data that was collected remotely before March. And the company that does that, probably needless to say, has much greater demand now than they had before March. So they are slowed down. It's going to take an extra 3 or 4 weeks to assemble that data because of the demand on that company. So Frederick, my question to you is, if you wait 2 or 3 weeks to make your request, are you still in their queue? Or would you be slowed down even more because it's going to be 3 or 4 weeks from the date you make the actual request?
No, we'll still be in the queue. I don't think I can discuss it with them, but I think we're not going to. Well, so let's say it takes 2 weeks, right, to make the decision, right? Then obviously, if they come back and tell me at that time, hey, we're still overloaded with requests, it's still going to take us 2 or 3 weeks to get it to you, then that's what's going to happen, right? So I'll lose my spot in the queue, you know. But right now, that's where we are.
Okay. So if the committee, let's see if we can get through this tonight, though. But it sounds as though if the committee really needs time to make a decision, or perhaps needs more input from staff to see a new map, we maybe could reconvene in a couple of weeks and do a quick meeting on just this item to finish it up, and our schedule would still be the same. Carrie, does that seem acceptable to you? And Brian and Abraham, city staff, is that, I mean, we'll try to do it tonight, but if we do have to defer a little, we would. Is that all right?
David, what I would love to know is which intersections the GPAC members would like to add that, right? That's going to make it a lot easier.
So we'll ask that. I just want to make sure I knew what we can and can't do tonight. So is there any other GPAC discussion before we see if there's any community members who want to speak? And then we'll do that very thing that Frederick just asked for.
One thing to keep in mind is that if we're going to collect data and we're going to go off this data for years to come, a lot of people are telecommuting, a lot of children are not even going to school at this time. I'm concerned about the data that we collect is not the actual data. So I'm really not opposed to just focusing on restructuring this a bit and then waiting even longer before we start gathering data, so it could be a little bit more accurate.
We're really getting down in the weeds now, but what I tried to explain to you before, and I'm sure I wasn't successful, is that we're going to actually collect data about operations at these intersections prior to COVID-19. And the way this is done, you're probably all familiar with traffic counts that are conducted in real time at the intersections. And obviously, if we did those now, as Councilmember Resendez said, we would get an inaccurate representation because so many people are not going to work or school. What we will be doing instead is that we're using data that's actually collected from cell phones that people carry in their pockets, and that, or wherever they carry them, in their cars. And that data has been collected already historically for a period before COVID-19 began. That data is available to us and will be re-aggregated to show us how many cars move through each of these intersections. And so the data we're going to be gathering is for our 30 study intersections prior to the shutdown that happened because of the pandemic. So Councilmember Resendez and others, you don't need to worry that the data will be inaccurate due to the slowdown now. It will actually be data from February and early March that we're going to collect, and we want to collect it. We want to get underway as quickly as we can, and we're absolutely not proposing to wait until things get back to whatever normal may be in the future. We are going to use the available historical data about what traffic was before the pandemic began.
That's a wonderful idea. I didn't know it was an option. Thank you for that.
It's amazing that it exists. But that's what I was saying. That, you know, 3 months ago, when you went to this company, they're called Streetlight is the name of the company, they could get you this data within a week or so because they had it all just sitting there. Now, every jurisdiction in the state needs to do the same thing. They can no longer do real-time traffic counts. They need to get the cell phone data instead. So there's really only one company who does it, and they've got a huge backlog. And that's why, on the one hand, we can make the data available, we can continue the project, but we do have to wait a few extra weeks because they've got such a backlog.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, all right. So with that said, shall we ask for public comment?
Mr. Chair, David, this is Abraham.
Yes.
I have one comment, and that's from Mr. Frederick Venture's comments about the possibility of a delay, is that if we do have to bring it back, my colleague Eva just shared with me that for public noticing, normally here in the city of Hollister, we would have to advertise at least 1 week in advance, and then it's a 10-day public, a 10-day period, so it would be about 3 weeks at minimum. So just to put that out there for
Okay. So if we can't do this tonight, we'll need at least 3 weeks, which may add a week or two more of delay. So in that sense, if I'm understanding you correctly, Abraham, it would be better to try and do this tonight if we possibly can.
David, can I make a suggestion, right, to make this easy? I'm thinking that the intersections along Fairview, so it's number 24, number 1, number 7, and number 6. I can get from recent studies that has been conducted information from those very easily, right? And then we can assess those from other sources and address it qualitatively in the general plan. So at this stage, those 4 intersections for me are up for grabs and selecting other ones in the city.
Great. Okay, well that maybe will help to make it easier tonight. So you're saying, Frederick, that we can delete without deleting numbers 24, 1, 7, and 6. They will still get studied just through a slightly different method, and we can add 4 other intersections more in town.
Yep.
Great. Okay. So GPAC members, perhaps you want to consider, as we listen to any public comment, what other 4 you might add, and then perhaps we can get a motion tonight to study those 26 plus the new 4, with the understanding that those 4 along Fairview are going to still be covered, but covered using different techniques. With that said, shall we move to any public comment? Okay, we'll do that. I don't know, is there anyone in the council chambers who wants to comment?
Doesn't appear to be.
Okay, then we have 3 hands raised virtually. The first speaker is John Casey.
Hi, this is John Casey. I'm a resident of Hollister. I'm representing myself. I thank the mayor for pointing out the Fairview items. I think that's a great idea to move them into the city. You know, if you're going to move spots tonight, I would certainly look at 25 and Sunflow, considering that 3, 2, 27, and 28 really are connected in terms of timing and traffic flow. So I think that would be a really good idea. Since 156 and 25 appear to be part of your planning area, I would probably include that intersection. That's a big traffic hiccup, but maybe there's a reason, maybe it's too far out. But anyway, that would be at least the 2 spots that I saw that I would recommend you take.
Great. Okay, thank you. Roxanne Stevens. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I just realized I hadn't unmuted myself. So yes, this is Roxanne Stevens, resident of Hollister. Just 2 quick things. First of all, I was just wondering if you could clarify the items that have future You might have said that and maybe I missed it. So number 17, number 20, number 22, number 23. I thought that was, oh, and number 21. What exactly does that mean? And then also, I'm just wondering if the analysis will include some contingencies. So for example, we know that we have development that are in the pipeline, so to speak. So we know that they're coming and that maybe we haven't broken ground, but they're in the works. So I know, I'm assuming that that will be part, or that will be taken into consideration in this analysis. But I also think that as we're moving forward, we want to be able to think of what are some of the possibilities moving forward and how traffic will be impacted based on those possibilities. So, and I know that that might be a big ask because there may be, you know, endless number of contingencies, but I also think that that as we're making decisions about moving forward, I think that's going to be something important for us to think about. So I just wanted to see, is that included in the analysis, or as we move forward in this planning process, will we then need to come back and relook at the analysis and add more information as we consider, you know, possible future development? So those are my two comments and questions.
Yeah, since they were questions, let me try and answer them, and Frederick or Danny may want to add to them. Taking the second question first, all of these intersections have been chosen with an eye toward what we believe is the likely future development pattern within the city and the surrounding area in the unincorporated county. As you said, there is a known pipeline of quite a large number of projects, and beyond that, there's even an understanding of likely areas where development might occur. And so we have selected these intersections with that in mind, and the analysis that we're going to do will begin by looking at existing traffic volumes at those, but the whole point of the analysis is to project future traffic volumes, congestion, and necessary improvements, assuming that the development that will be foreseen in the general plan occurs. So that's a very long way of saying that the short answer is yes, future development is being taken into account. In terms of your second question, or your first question about what future means, as I understand it, the word future means that these are intersections that don't actually exist today, but you know, one of the streets exists, but there may be a three-legged intersection today that will become four-legged. There may be some significant changes, or there may just not be an intersection at that location yet, but as roadways are extended, they will be, and we know that when those roadways are extended, they will become very important intersection locations. And so even though they don't exist as intersections today, they still need to be included in the list of 30 study intersections so that we can project what volumes and what congestion and what types of improvements will be needed when the intersections are built.
David, you hit it head on. Yep.
Thank you. Roxanne, was that the end of your comments? I think so. She's muted her microphone. So our last speaker is Elia Salinas, and we'll see if anyone else raises a hand after that. But Elia, you recognized?
Yes, actually, thank you, Roxanne Stevens, because that's exactly where I was headed on my questions. So you've answered those. The only other question that I do have is there a limit on these 30, or it'll increase, like as you said, it could increase as you're going along on the projects, or are you restricting yourself to just a certain amount? And that's my question.
Yeah, let me answer that too, because it is a direct question. The limitation here has to do with the project budget. So our budget includes studying 30 intersections. There's no reason that we could not add intersections either now or later, but to do so would require changes to the project budget. We do have a contingency in our budget, but some of it has already been used with staff's consent on other items, and we would be hesitant at this point to recommend using money from the contingency to add more intersections, because they do cost, the dollars per intersection is actually high enough that it starts adding up pretty quickly. That said, certainly in the future, if we get halfway through this project and determine that there's 1 or 3 or 5 additional intersections to study, we could add them. And at that point, if we have contingency money remaining still, we could use that, or we could even go back to the council and ask for additional funds. I know that the budget for this project has already been of some concern, so I'm also hesitant to ask the council for additional funding. But again, coming back to the main point, that the limitation here is about the funding for the overall study.
Hi, and this is Danny. When we looked at the intersections, originally we had far more than the 30 intersections, and what we did was we prioritized the 30 intersections. The ones that were over the amount of 30, what staff could do at a later date if we needed to study more intersections, we could probably put together a project outside of the general plan project and take that to council and do a limited study of those intersections separate and apart from the general plan update.
All right, thank you for that clarification, Danny. Are there any other public speakers? Any others in the council chambers? There are no hands raised right now. Oh, I think, was that a no?
No.
No, all right. So there are no speakers. Alia Salinas has raised her hand again. Alia, did you have a further comment that we can take quickly?
Yes. So I guess the second part to that, because you were talking about pulling 25 and 1, and I can't remember the other number. So if you're pulling those off the draft study, I'm assuming that you've already spent the money for the study, or you were talking earlier that you're going to go and you'll be able to look at what the county has done. Would that add more streets, more intersections, or this is it? Otherwise, it is going to cost more money. I just want to clarify, because you're pulling some off, and would you be able to add any, or would that, like I said, over exceed what you have for a budget? Thank you for allowing me to complete my questions.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So just to clarify, this is what Frederick has said, is that we can remove those intersections. They will actually still get studied. We will use different techniques. It will be utilizing some data that's available from the county, from previous studies. It may not be exactly the same type of analysis, but I think Frederick's assuring us that it will be good enough. And by eliminating those 4, all along Fairview, number 1, 6, 7, and 24, it actually does free up 4 other intersections. And we did get a couple of recommendations to look at 156 and 25, to look at another intersection along 25. And I think we're done with public comments. So what I would like to do is, Frederick, I'll put you on the spot for a minute and ask if you have a recommendation as to what those 4 would be, or if you prefer, we can ask the GPAC members for their 4 recommendations.
So for 25 and 156, right, that's where Caltrans want to put the roundabout in, and then in the long term, there's a plan to put an interchange there. I don't want to get no value out of studying it. I know that's what's planned, right? It was confirmed today. Caltrans has a short-term plan to install a roundabout there, and the long term, the overcrossing. And again, it's way outside of the city, even though it may be important for the community. But this is my opinion on 25, 156.
Because it's, and I'm just going to echo what you're saying or amplify it, because the plans are essentially already made and it's already been studied by others, we don't gain any value by studying it again in this general plan.
Correct.
All right. Other suggestions that you might make, Frederick?
There were a couple of intersections, I think, along Sunny Slope, Memorial, Hillcrest Memorial, that we had, I think, in our previous list. There were also thoughts maybe on 4th and San Felipe. I think those were the bigger ones that I can recall. We could probably study, we have it on Buena Vista, think we have Miller there. There's actually like 4 intersections on Buena Vista. I don't know if there's more there that we should look at.
Okay. Well, let's turn it over to the GPAC then. It sounded like some of the GPAC members also have ideas of specific ones to look at. So let me just open it up, turn it back to the GPAC for a conversation. Does any of the three of you want to suggest specific intersections? We can add 4. So are there specific intersections that you would like to see to round out those 4?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in here because again, I'm pretty familiar with some of the studies that have been done. And just to add to that, 19, there's a intersection plan there already, and 18, some other improvements that are already planned. So there is information on those 2 areas right there. I look at coming from that direction though, Union Road, Sierra Vista area, you're going to have a lot of new traffic coming from that new development that's being built there. That might be an area to consider. If there's also the issue of at Union and Valley View, but if anything, Sierra Vista probably has to be looked at. There's a school there and a lot of new homes being built, a lot more traffic coming in that direction pretty quick. My concerns had to do with Sunny Slope. Frederick, I think you hit that correctly. That's an area that has a lot of traffic flow going through it, and even into up to Lad Lane, which is another problem to that point. Hillcrest Memorial area is exactly right. Again, those are problem areas. Danny can jump into some of these. I'm sure he's very familiar with some of these problems that him and I have talked about for years. So that Hillcrest area, Memorial, Hillcrest, and I think there was another intersection, I'm not familiar what the name is right now, that is a problem along Hillcrest. I wouldn't worry about the 15625. We just got done having a meeting about that. It is an overpass is priority 1 for one of the projects on Highway 25, so that's being taken care of already. So I wouldn't go in that direction. But I would start with Union, some of the Sunny Slope, Hillcrest Memorial, definitely, and the other items that you might have had for Hillcrest. Thank you.
All right, and I think, I just want to say, I think to move this along, it might be sufficient to give staff and consultants direction for those generalized areas, and then through a motion, allow us to finish this up and not bring it back to another meeting. But I, of course, want to get the consent of the GPAC to do that. Danny, were you about to talk? Was that your voice coming through?
Yeah, no, I agree with you about getting to give staff just a little bit of leeway in making those final decisions after the GPAC gives us some general consensus in the direction they want it to go. With regard to Sunny Slope Road, I have a couple of traffic studies that are being done on Sunny Slope now. I do agree with the mayor with regards to Hillcrest and Memorial. Maybe that intersection should be studied.
Mm-hmm.
I know on the previous general plan, we had level D for San Benito and 4th Street, and also for San Benito and Tres Pinos. So for definitely San Benito and 4th Street, I think that, as you mentioned, Frederick, I think that should be included.
Okay, good. We can absolutely do that. Okay, so we'll have that one too.
All right. In order to move this along, I of course cannot make a motion, but I'd like to suggest a motion, which would be to accept this list as presented with several changes. The first being to eliminate the 4 intersections along Fairview, numbers 24, 1, 7, and 6, understanding that they will be addressed separately, and to also at least consider whether it's necessary to study numbers 18 and 19 at SR25 and Airline, because perhaps there's additional studies for those already underway, which would free up between 4 and 6 intersections, and then that those be filled in by 1 or 2 along Union, at Sierra Vista and or Valley View, Hillcrest Memorial, possibly another location along Hillcrest, and along San Benito at either or both 4th and Tres Pinos. And that finally we verify that we have enough happening separately through other traffic studies along Sunny Slope, and if those would not be sufficient, that we consider adding those as well. So that's neither an exact list of what's taken out. It's saying 4 to 6 would be taken out. It's also not an exact list of what's to be added. There's 6 or 7 that might be added there, but that you would empower staff to make those changes and finalize this list based on that motion that I just suggested. Would anyone like to make that?
I would agree with that. I would make that motion.
I agree with that too. Well stated.
Great. So I think we have a motion from Member Huboy and a second from Chair Velasquez. Is there any further discussion on that item? Okay, then I'll just quickly call a vote. Chair Velasquez?
Aye.
Vice Chair Huboy?
Aye.
Council Member Resendez?
Aye.
Great. Okay, I think then that ends that particular item. And we're close to being able to wrap up our meeting. I just essentially have a couple of announcements here at the end. And we can also open it up if any GPAC member wants at this time to agendize any other items. Your next meeting will not be until August. Before August, we are planning a series of online visioning events, and I already alluded to those earlier in the meeting. I know we've lost some members of the public from the audience already, but I want to make sure everyone knows that these are also published on the website already, so people can go back and look at those to find out exactly when they are. This will be the same visioning event held 4 times, so no one needs to come more than once. It's going to be so interesting. Maybe some people would like to come more than once, but it will be essentially the same experience 4 different times. And as you can see here, those are listed on Saturday, June 27th at 10 in the morning, on Tuesday, June 30th at 6 p.m., Wednesday, July 8th at 7 a.m. early in the morning, particularly for business people and people who need to who get out early in the morning, and then Thursday, July 9th at 6 p.m. This will be a hands-on visioning exercise facilitated through Zoom, likely including small group work and a lot of really robust discussion to talk about some of what are the most important issues facing Hollister and what should go into a vision for the city. We'll then, after we get all that information, we will pull that all together and bring it into a single vision statement that we'll bring to the GPAC in a draft form, and that will happen at a meeting on August 13th, again at 6 p.m. like this one was, and that will be a meeting of the GPAC. Unless we get requested to add other items, it will be a GPAC meeting exclusively focused on visioning. Your meeting number 3 is not on this slide because we don't have an exact date. As we mentioned already, we're slowed down a little on some of the primary existing conditions work because of the issues with COVID-19, but we anticipate that meeting number 3 will happen in late October because that's the soonest that we can get our existing conditions work finished, and that's when that's the topic of that meeting is the existing conditions. I want to mention also that Member Huboy suggested that there be what I would call an audit. He called it a critique of the existing general plan, and that's something that we can make sure that we bring forward at that October meeting as well. So that gives you an overview of where we're headed. Again, the online visioning events in late June and early July, and your next meeting in August, and your meeting number 3 in October on a date still to be set. That pretty much concludes our presentation, but the last thing would be to ask if there are any members of the committee who want to request any other items to be added to that August 13th agenda.
I just wanted to say on the 27th, I might like to see how I can work that in on my camping trip up in Oregon.
Yeah, I mean, one of the great things about doing these remotely is that they can be done very remotely. So folks who are on vacation or elsewhere can log into any of these. And I do also want to mention that it will be great if some or all of the GPAC members can observe some or all of these meetings. We don't expect or encourage you to be active participants in these 4 meetings. And if you're not able to attend all of them, that will be acceptable as well, because we'll be giving full reports on them, both online and at your August 13th meeting.
Great, thank you, David.
Thank you.
All right, I think that that's a wrap. Unless Carrie or others at staff have any other items, I think we can, and with the chair's concurrence, I think we can adjourn this meeting, and that we will reconvene on August 13th.
Do you need a motion to adjourn, or?
Sure, I think a motion to adjourn is in order.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second, is there a second? Councilman Resendez, you still there?
Yes, I'll second. Sorry.
Okay. Thank you, no problem. There's a motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion passes unanimously. The meeting is adjourned, and we'll certainly see many of you at our 4 meetings in late June and early July, and we will see all of you on August 13th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Great.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.